Welcome everyone to another exciting episode of the Jacks of All Fandoms podcast, the show where we only talk about 5 fandoms because those are the 5 that we can agree on most of the time. I'm the average Joe. I'm here with my partner Nick by night.
May the 4th be with you.
We are recording this one, well, we're recording the Saturday before May 4th, but the plan is, if I can balance this with my work schedule, I'll have this edited and out by May 4th. And, sorry it's been 2 years.
Yeah, we've both had life things to do, so it's been very hectic for the both of us.
Yup.
So, what are we going to talk about this May the 4th, Joe?
Well, the last time we gave our thoughts on, the future of Star Wars... Well, actually, I don't even remember what we talked about.
I'm pretty sure it was who would lift Mjolnir.
Thor's hair, that's right, Thor's hammer.
Yeah, we figured out which Star Wars characters could lift Mjolnir.
I was thinking of the Marvel one for some reason.
Yeah,
Sorry.
we were having the discuss. We did that was around the same time we recorded the different Marvel Plus shows, the Disney Plus Marvel shows.
Yeah.
Who have all ended a long time ago. It does not feel like it.
We recorded that one halfway through WandaVision.
Oh yeah,
when that was airing, and then we went right into the No, not right into it, because I remember we did that one the day that the Bad Batch hit Disney Plus.
Yeah, we did the day Bad Batch, and that's on season 3. So, that's definitely how long it's been since we've been talking.
Yup.
Or at least in terms of talking about the topic of Star Wars. So
right, so today I figured it's about time to start going through our tier list of the films. You know, we make a lot of jokes, we talk a lot about Star Wars. I think it's fair to finally let the audience know where each film stands as a film. And yeah, we have a lot of opinions. I do want to clarify at the beginning, if we make fun of actors or directors or anything, we are not condoning the people who harass them on social media.
No, that's not a cool thing to do at all. We're just making fun of situations. We don't want to have any malice towards actual people.
Exactly. Okay, so now that disclaimer is out of the way, that should avoid a lot of the negativity. By the way, don't cause any negativity in the comments section, or we will find you.
Which is ironic, because Liam Neeson was actually in one of these movies.
And then his voice was in another one.
Yeah, the Obi-Wan series, and then also in the Clone Wars, and yeah.
Well, I was talking about Attack of the Clones.
Oh yeah, technically his voice was in that one.
Yeah, when Anakin is off murdering sand people. Anakin, no!
Not just the men, but the women and the children too.
All right.
We should probably get into I think we're gonna start off by actually talking about the 3 trilogies and just doing our basic overviews of them as a whole before we get into our actual personal rankings.
Yeah, we went back and forth on this a couple times. So, I guess the original trilogy...
All right, I didn't know if you wanted to go chronologically or
release
date. Original trilogy's fine.
All right.
It is the original after all, so we might as well start there.
Yeah.
All right, so they are obviously technological marvels of the time. They basically catapulted the sci-fi genre into the public, the public consciousness, really, because sci-fi wasn't okay, I'm not going to say it wasn't popular because, Star Trek came before that, and Star Trek was really popular.
Star Trek had a really rough go of getting started, though. Doctor Who was off doing its own thing in the BBC, but over here in the US, I think Lucille Ball had to step in and force them to allow Star Trek to get on the air or something like that. That's sort of a whole interesting topic in and of itself, the weird symbiotic relationship between Star Trek and Star Wars.
Oh yeah, everybody is you can either be a Trekkie or a Star Wars fan, and I don't necessarily think that's a thing. You can whatever you... Obviously, we're the Jack of All Fandoms podcast. We dip our toes in a lot of things. Personally, I'm not huge into Star Trek, but through as I like to call it, nerd osmosis, I am aware of the basic jumping on points of Star Trek without having actually seen it. So
I've seen a few of the series all the way through, but my point is when George Lucas was starting Star Wars, he got people to give him money because, hey, Star Trek is a thing, people like that. And then a couple years later, when Star Trek wanted to make movies, and people were hesitant about that, they were like, oh, those Star Wars films are in theaters, people are really liking those, maybe this can come back.
Yeah, and then that got the ball rolling for more prominent sci-fi in the American Hollywood. And honestly, I'd say like one of the unsung heroes of the early days was probably George Lucas's wife, because like her amazing editing skills. Like George is a man who has a lot of ideas, and sometimes it's not like easy for him to like how do I put this? It's not easy for him to like put it on screen. He likes to go on much like us. He likes to go on tangents.
But then he also has difficulty communicating what he wants sometimes.
Yes, and his wife actually, his wife at the time, basically understood George. Okay, so this is clearly what he's trying to go for. Here's how we're gonna, like, film the movie around that.
Yeah. That, and also, I feel like a lot of people underestimate how much of, like, a community project the original trilogy was. Like, George was still relatively fresh out of film school. All these artists and actors who were coming on, they also understood what he was going for, and were able to figure out a compromise to get that out. And I'll say not everything about the original trilogy holds up well, like, objectively. You know, no hate. They're still really, really good films.
Oh, absolutely. They're, like I said, they're the bedrock of, like, what eventually would get to the ball rolling for Hollywood sci-fi in terms of, like, the big screen releases.
I'll admit, looking back as an adult, there are a couple issues that I have problems with. The acting can be a bit weak in some places, and there are a few plot threads where I'm like, you know, that really could have been written a little more strongly.
And that's a fair point. Like, some of it is just, like, you know, screenwriting of the time. Other times it's just, like, he wasn't, like you said, he was new out of film school. So he didn't really know how to be a director of actors quite yet. So
unfortunately, that's never, that didn't eventually become a skill he would get either.
Yeah, we'll get to the prequels when we get to them.
But yeah, I feel like a lot of people really sort of take the original trilogy for granted. Like, just how new and how interesting it was and how different it was from anything at the time.
There's actually one of my favorite stories that, I forget what talk show he was on, but Mark Hamill did say this story about when he was filming Empire. Basically, everybody didn't... They kind of knew that Star Wars might be something special, but like the first...
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
But like the first episode, like the first movie, they were like, okay, yeah, here's this script. But then once Empire came out, like, oh yeah, it was all hush hush. So originally, what was in the script was Darth Vader's, very famous, drama bomb for Luke on Bespin. Originally was Obi-Wan killed your father. But like that was what was written in the scripts, and then Lucas basically pulled Mark Hamill aside and said, okay, you're the only one outside of the production who knows this fact.
So if it leaks, we'll know it was you.
Precisely. And he told him, I am your father. And then he just had to keep that secret for a long time, to the point where Harrison Ford saw the film, did not know the twist, and he was just like genuinely shocked. And I can't repeat what he said to Mark Hamill.
Yeah, he cussed at him. This is a family picture.
Yeah, unfortunately, this is a family picture, and we're not going to be cussing on this here podcast.
But, yeah, I remember, I saw that interview too. The other thing I thought was funny, the fact that he was like talking about how like he was anxious about accidentally letting it slip. Especially in telling the co-stars, because, according to him, the fastest way to get information to travel fast is to tell Carrie Fisher in confidence.
Yep. What was the joke? He said, telephone, telegraph, telecarry.
Yup.
I love that Harrison, Mark, and Carrie were just like such actual like really good friends in real life.
That is part of what really made the trilogy work so well, the natural chemistry between all the actors.
Yeah, the fact that they genuinely cared for each other. Through, like, Mark has basically said that, yeah, I know we played siblings in a movie, but, like, she actually did feel like my sister.
And even putting aside, like, all the other things that other people contributed, I feel like people really underestimate how really good at atmosphere George is.
Oh, yeah, like, there is, like, weight and gravitas to all the shots, especially John Williams' score. Like, my goodness, that is...
Yeah, exactly.
And nothing beats practical effects. And this is going to be a point I'll bring up when we get in later. The original trilogy, because they didn't have access to CGI at the time, they had to work with what, means that they had. Like, the Jim Henson Creature Shop. They worked with They created an entire line of special effects. Like, they created an industry for, like, all the miniatures and stuff they needed for, like, the ship battles. Like, they created an entire subsection of Hollywood movie making. Like, that is how big Star Wars was.
Yeah, and also I really appreciate the films. I think Alec Guinness said this in an interview. Like, later in life, he did famously start to resent his role in the films because it overshadowed everything else in his career. But at the time, he said it was refreshing, even though, yeah, the dialogue was a bit ropey and, you know, it was a little bit like a silly fairy tale in his mind. But he liked the fact that Star Wars was like going back to a simpler time, in a time where like Hollywood was obsessed with getting grittier, a bit darker, a bit more violent, and a bit more gory. And he appreciated that they were trying to rekindle the love of old school cinema.
Yeah, and this is a friend of mine who, I won't name here, but, like, you know, legal reasons. But, yeah, a friend of mine actually mentioned Star Wars, they don't particularly see Star Wars as sci-fi, more like fantasy by way of sci-fi. And I honestly do believe that. Yeah, it is basically...
I think science fantasy is a good way to look at it.
Yeah, it is very much science fantasy. Like, it is just like, you know, the Force itself. You know, there's the light and there's the darkness, and the light has to constantly battle against the darkness, and that is very fairy tale-esque.
One of the other things that I really respect about the world building of old school Star Wars, it's just a general good principle. If you're able to show the characters existing in the world and make it seem like it's their normal everyday life, even if it's something supernatural or alien. Because that's the thing, I remember reading it somewhere that early in George's development, he was talking about sci-fi of the day, and like, they'll have the engineer of the ship, the one who fixes the ship, be like this old scientist who is sitting there in the back seat going, the wonders of science is so amazing! Whereas the guys who fixed the ships in his movie, Han and Chewie, who is just like, no, this goes there and that goes there.
Yeah, they're like actual like mechanics, like you would see here. So like that's just the world they live in.
Yeah, exactly. He wanted the ships to feel like a car. A guy, he doesn't marvel at the wonder of the spaceship because he just gets in his ship, flies from one planet to the next, gets off the ship, and continues with his day because that's just his day. That's life.
The world just feels so lived in the original trilogy.
Exactly. I've been rewatching the Studio Ghibli films recently. That's something I've really noticed about Miyazaki's scripts as well. He is really good at doing that too.
Just making lived-in worlds, making you feel as though you know this world, even though you're like just being introduced to it.
Yeah, exactly. And that's like just showing the characters living the world, and then you're picking up the pieces of like what their normal is like, and then you get a little bit of backstory.
Yeah, because he lives on a planet that's entirely a desert, so what does his father do, or his uncle do? He farms moisture, because that's a resource that needs to be, you know, done in like a desert planet. He farms the moisture out of the air, and that's necessary for life. And it's not even dwelled upon that much, but like that is just like, that's his job.
Yeah, especially not just a desert planet with 2 suns. You know, our deserts are miserable and unbearable. Imagine when you have, like, literally twice the amount of heat and solar radiation coming at you every hour of the day.
And it's not just like, oh, you can move to a different place. The entire planet is a desert.
I think overly sarcastic productions called that the Planet of Hats trope, where every single part of the planet follows one single culture or weather pattern. It's like the opposite of Earth, where Earth has everything on it.
Yeah, and that's a fair point, but
yeah, I like it for that. I think it makes it a lot easier. Like I don't think Star Wars would benefit too much from Tolkien style world building, like where every single planet has its own culture, and you need the Silmarillion just to understand everything.
Yes, it's basically, it does the job it needs to do to get you invested in the world, and you don't really need any side story. But whatever you do read on the side can be enjoyable.
And it leaves a lot open-ended, so you can just, like, make guesses and question about what kind, and, you know, fill the gaps in your own head. I think either George or Dave Filoni once said there's the 3 canons of Star Wars. The canon that's on screen, the canon in my head, and the canon in the mind of the audience.
Yeah, that's true. There are 3 different stories. The story on the screen, the story in the director's head, and the story in the audience. Definitely makes sense. Alright, shall we move on to the prequel trilogy now?
Sure. This'll be fun.
Oh, come on. Okay, so, when I was but a wee lad, I willfully admit that I thought that the prequel trilogy was rather hokey. I did not like the CGI, but again, that is just like, bringing back the points that we made earlier about how groundbreaking the original trilogy was.
Well, keep in mind, though, the CG is... The CG was also relatively new at the time. Look at the CG films before Phantom Menace.
Yes, exactly. It was brand spanking new. I guess the reason that maybe the original trilogy doesn't look as dated as, say, like the prequel trilogy is probably because there were physical elements there.
Well, don't forget, there were a lot of physical elements that were there for prequel trilogy, too.
And then, the George Lucas was like, no, I want to make it look more like this. So then, of course, the special releases got more and more of the... Like, Yoda used to be a puppet in The Phantom Menace, and then eventually they replaced it with the CGI.
I do prefer the CG Yoda. I feel like the puppet they made for Phantom Menace looks weird. He looks fat. It's like they stretched out his facial features, and it just looks a little uncanny valley.
Well, he was probably chunkier when he was living on Coruscant, and then he lost a bunch of weight when he moved to the desert, or when he moved to the swamp.
I mean, that's fair. I can see that.
Yeah, because he was, like, opulent, and as Dooku said, the biggest problem with the Jedi Council was Yoda, because he was complacent. So yeah, maybe he just packed on he just grabbed a few extra blue milk macaroons at the canteen whenever he went into the Jedi Council meeting.
I can see why they CG'd him in for 2 and 3, though, because it would be hard to choreograph with a puppet.
Oh yeah, no, actually.
An actual lightsaber duel would be really hard.
Yeah, Yoda jumping around, is it... You've definitely seen the memes where they replace Palpatine with the Kermit puppet, and they literally just throw the puppet. I love those videos. And that actually brings me into another point: the memes, the prequels. Okay, so like, obviously they were making the memes at the dawn of the internet, right? And like, people, you knew them, people understood them. For some reason, in like the last few years, prequel memes have exploded.
I think it's because people originally made prequel memes to hate on the prequels, and then the people who grew up on the prequels and really liked them started using them ironically, and now that's created a wave of positive feelings towards the prequels.
Precisely. Like, how many lines do you know verbatim from the prequel trilogy because of these memes? Like, people who didn't even really watch the prequels, maybe watched them once, they know these lines because they have the memes and they're everywhere. I love democracy.
Because of Obi-Wan?
This is where the fun begins.
Power! Unlimited power!
I don't like sand. It's rough, coarse, and irritating, and it gets everywhere.
Actually, that brings me to another point. I have come to realize the prequels, from my last couple rewatches, I realized the prequels are like 1 or 2 rewrites from being like really, really good. Maybe even better than the original trilogy.
I would concur. This is an actual story, and I've told you this story before, but I want to say it on the podcast.
Yeah.
A friend of mine, she had no idea anything about Star Wars. She'd never even seen the movies. She maybe knows a few, like, base pop culture things, because, it's been in pop culture forever.
Yep.
So, by way of Anakin's story, I explained her the entire timeline up until the sequel trilogy, and trust me, we'll get to that. But... I basically explained the timeline of Star Wars through the lens of Anakin Skywalker, because if you really think about it, he is basically the focal point of the first two trilogies.
He's the main character.
And she actually was very interested. It's weird. I kind of like accidentally made her less enthusiastic about the original trilogy, but she did want to check out the prequels, and I actually did convince her to watch a few episodes of Clone Wars. So like,
nice.
I figured, okay, that's a win in my book that she actually started watching a few episodes of Clone Wars. Which, by the way, that is one of the best things to come out of the prequel trilogy is the Clone Wars television series. Unfortunately, we're not going to really go into that because we're mostly focused on the films.
Okay, I will admit, Clone Wars. It has a lot of really high highs as a series, but it also has some lows that I don't really like.
And I that's fair.
But my point more so is part of the reason the prequel trilogy... okay, I will give George Lucas credit, because, like, he didn't want to have to compromise on things, because they... for the original trilogy, he felt like he was constrained by the producers and the studio who was giving him the money, saying... rewrite. rewrite, and he hated the idea of having to work with focus groups again. So he funded the whole thing out of pocket. He used his own money to make those movies.
And there is something to be said about the artist's vision.
Yeah, exactly.
But
the problem is the original trilogy. It was very much a community project, and the prequels, a lot of people were hopping on board who were just like, oh, well, George made the originals, he knows what he's doing, so they just went with him without much of a fuss.
And that's exactly, like I said, all the work behind the scenes of the original trilogy, the editing, everything else, it was a community effort, like you said. Like, George does kind of need somebody to guide him, as it were.
I think he needed a co-director.
Yeah.
Somebody to sit down with the actors and be like, okay, George calls himself the king of wooden dialogue. The kind of writing we're going for here. Go home, go watch Princess Bride, go watch The Twilight Zone, go watch Errol Flynn Robin Hood, go watch some old school theater. That's the style we're going for. If the dialogue doesn't sound natural, I want you to come and tell it to me and try to think of a new way to say it.
We'll get into it when we get into, like, the sequel trilogy.
Right,
but, like, I see your point. Because the dialogue is so I'm not gonna even say it is wooden in some cases.
Yeah,
but like
I like wooden dialogue
old
when
school.
It's done well.
It's like old school theater, like you said. So like the fact that the 6 movies of the trilogy sound like that, and then you get the other 3, which like try to incorporate modern slang and such. That's kind of part of the reason. We'll get to that when we get to it. But
yeah, right. But I feel like that's part of the reason why the big standouts of the trilogies are the guys who either were from that era or know what George was going for.
Yes.
Like Ewan McGregor. Sorry, I'm trying to think of how to pronounce his name. I don't want to get everybody angry in the comments. I think it's Ian McDiarmid. I think that's how you pronounce it. Palpatine.
Ian McDermott.
Dermot. I don't know.
Dermot. I've heard in the I think I've heard in interviews Ian McDermott. So.
Okay. He's an old school Shakespeare actor.
Of course.
He was filming Return of the Jedi at the same time he was in a Shakespeare production, like a couple of miles away from the set.
Palpatine is very much a Shakespearean villain.
In the best possible way.
Oh yeah, absolutely in the best possible way. He is probably one of the most entertaining villains in fiction. Other than my beloved Joker, of course. We have to sneak in comics-related stuff in everything we do. At least I do.
Fair. Well, while we're sneaking in other things, go watch Past the Sports Festival.
I know! Okay. Oh my god, I think we literally had this exact argument during the other May the 4th thing.
Yes, we did.
I am busy!
I know.
I have things to do. I will watch Past the Sports Festival eventually. I promise I will get further into My Hero Academia. You can quote me on that, internet.
Alright, so...
I can't promise when it'll happen, but it will absolutely happen at one point.
Okay. But yeah, I don't know. I guess one of the other things I will say, I love the choreography of the prequel trilogy.
Oh, the lightsaber choreography is some of the best in the entire series.
I do think the fights, they need a little polish in some places. And I definitely feel like, I'll also say this for the acting. I think they needed a couple more takes and a couple more re-records to get it right. But
absolutely.
But the choreography, I feel like sometimes it knows that it's really good, so it dwells on it for a little too long.
But you can't tell me when Darth Maul ignites both of his lightsabers.
Oh, I'm not denying that.
And then, then Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan drop the robes, they ignite, and then that John Williams Duel of the Fates starts playing.
Oh, don't get me wrong. Duel of the Fates is pretty good.
I think Duel of the Fates, and this, I don't know if this is going to be controversial or not, I think one of the best pieces of Star Wars composition is Duel of the Fates.
I get you. And I really like how that song rears its head in other places. Like, it starts playing subtly in the background while Anakin is on his way to rescue Shmi in the second film.
Yeah. So, it's just, it's like poetry, it rhymes.
I know a lot of people complained about the prequels because they said the story of the prequels makes the original trilogy feel smaller. I feel like...
I wouldn't agree with that, really.
Yeah, exactly. I think I've said this on record before. The people who say your expectations are what made the sequels bad to you, I feel like that argument really goes to the prequels. Like, objectively, the prequels have a lot of problems with, with writing and acting. But a lot of the other arguments, like people who try to break down every single individual thing about it, like, haha, they didn't say the names of the Jedi until 20 minutes into the film. A lot of these points are just unfounded because they are things that were intentional, conscious choices to align better with the original trilogy.
Do you really need to know the name of every Jedi on the Council? Is that really something that the layman needs to know, or do you just need to know the emotion that young Anakin is feeling?
That's also true, but...
But there is definitely, like, side material that explains them and makes it richer, and what Jarl Puth, I think, sacrifices himself holding a planet together in one of the comics, isn't that how he dies? Jarl Puth, the long neck guy, I think he, like, held a planet together and, like, died of an aneurysm of some kind.
It's been a good decade since I read the Clone Wars comics.
I was about to say, like, I'm going off, like, tell me if I'm wrong in the comments. But,
Certainly.
But as I recall, that's what happens. But
I feel like the overarching narrative of the prequels was always going to be a hard sell, because, like, the original trilogy had a very, very simple plot when you get down to it. Prequels are trying to tell, like, 25 years of political history
in like
9 hours.
In like 9-hour movie, in a 9-hour span, yeah. But of course, with the prequel trilogy, that is the beauty of being a prequel is we know where it's going to end. But so like we know Anakin is going to become Vader eventually, but like sometimes the adventure isn't necessarily in the destination; it's in the journey and how we get to that. And I will admit there are times in the films where it's like shaky at best how he got that far. But then of course there's side material like the Clone Wars television series that delves into his character a little more, and you can actually see a more logical through line.
Well, honestly, I like the through line that the movies give us. I think there's enough information there, and people just...
Oh, there's enough!
I think people were so blinded by the hatred of the bad acting and the bad writing that they were just looking for things to hate, which I think also came into play a little bit with the sequels, but we'll get to that when we get to that.
Liar! You underestimate my power!
That's not the high ground, I mean, not the Jedi way!
High ground! Again, this is the legacy of the prequels, unfortunately, is the memes that will eventually...
I will say, as funny as I find the memes, I do get slightly annoyed sometimes at myself and at the fans. Because, like, there were so many memes about Anakin killing the younglings that when that scene pops up, when Anakin goes to murder the younglings, I laugh. I smile.
And part of that is the kid's delivery of, Master Skywalker, what do we do? Okay, so there's... Actually, I kind of want to talk about this scene if you want to go on a little side tangent here. Because I know you had the novelization, so I would like... And I remember you said there was a version of Anakin's reasoning, as it were, through that I would like you to discuss. But I would like to discuss something that I've mentioned before on this this channel. The William Shakespeare's Star Wars books, which I have all 9 of now. Basically, it's what it says on the tin. It's the scripts of the original, all 9 movies, actually, put into, like, Shakespearean quotation. And something that I thought was interesting is at the youngling scene where Anakin is slaughtering the younglings, he basically, there's an extra added thing where he basically asks if they've said their nightly prayers prior, and basically because it's enough insight into his head that he realizes, like, I want you kids to be one with the Force after what I have done, because I feel like there's a bit of him that is still a good person, but he knows that this is the way to save his wife. And I'm like, okay, it's dark, and I just kind of like the layers of complexity within it.
I feel like that works really well for a Shakespeare version, especially like if you want to make the parallels to Hamlet, where Hamlet sees his uncle praying, and he decides not to murder him in that moment, because then his uncle will be forgiven and go to heaven. That's a really cool parallel.
Oh, and actually, in that same thing, because it was Revenge of the Sith, they literally do the play scene from Hamlet. So, you know, when they're at the opera, and the most famous, best and famous scene of that movie is, you know, the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise. Instead of Palpatine telling him this during the space opera, he actually did the Hamlet scene and told the actors to do the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise, so that would prompt Anakin to start asking questions. I'm like, okay, that's an interesting addition.
Yeah, I like that.
But you said that you've read the novelization of...
It was a long time ago, but yeah, from what I remember, Anakin in his head, he was starting to separate Anakin and Vader as different people, so in his mind, it was okay for him to allow Vader to do this, because it was necessary for Anakin to be able to save Padme. And I think part of that part of that for the story of Anakin also comes to the 10 plus years he had where he was just groomed by Palpatine. One of the things that George and Filoni talked about was the concept that Anakin's fall wouldn't have happened if he had been trained by Qui-Gon. Not because Obi-Wan is a bad person or a bad teacher, but because Obi-Wan was in the wrong headspace to take on Anakin at the time. And
oh yeah, his master just died, and he was saddled with this responsibility that he had no idea he was going to be in for.
Mm-hmm. He's basically a teen mom. But even beyond that, Anakin needed a father figure, and Qui-Gon, being an older, more responsible person, could do that for him, whereas Obi-Wan could only ever be a brother figure to Anakin. And Anakin was going to have a natural rebellious streak no matter what. So
because he's a teenager, all teenagers have those.
Exactly. That coupled with his origin story in human trafficking and the scars he had, Qui-Gon had a lot better understanding about how to teach someone like that because he was more learned in the world outside of the Jedi Temple. He would have understood how to relate to Anakin, whereas Obi-Wan, he didn't have that much experience in the world yet, so he didn't know how to reach Anakin in the way that Anakin needed. And going back to the rebellion point, it is a teenage boy's natural instincts to rebel against their parent by trying to be like the opposite of their parent. That just happens in human development. Not to everyone, but it's a general thing, and it would have happened to Anakin. So if the thing he was trying to rebel against was the guy who rebels against the system, then Anakin trying to be the opposite would become more into the system and try to uphold the Jedi code more. So when he had Obi-Wan as his mentor, being like, yes, you must follow the order, do what they say, respect the council. He wants to do the opposite.
That is a fair point. And actually that reminds me of something with a little side tangent, but it is related. Mm-hmm. One of the Dark Horse comics that I've read for the Empire. Basically, there was a bit where he actually went against Palpatine in one of these things because Palpatine was running an illegal slave market, and we all know how Anakin feels about that, so he secretly undermined him because he's just like, yeah, cause it just shows, not necessarily that there's good, I mean, we did obviously prove that there was technically good in Anakin when he sacrificed himself to save Luke.
Right.
But just the idea that he wasn't entirely hopeless. It was more for, like, selfish reasons, because, like, that's how he was, like, he didn't like how he was treated back when he was a kid.
Well, that depends on how you interpret it.
Oh, yeah, depending on how you interpret it.
We'll get into that when we talk about the movies individually.
Absolutely. And, since we're going to be talking about the movies individually, shall we move on to the sequel trilogy?
Yeah.
If we must. Well, actually, no, I have to head out, so, bye! I really don't want to be here for this, but okay. Okay. Well,
you're just like that scene in Muppet Christmas Carol where Rizzo and Gonzo are like, "Oh, this part looks bad. Bye, kids. See you at the end."
Or that one episode of SpongeBob where, like, Mr. Krabs asks for volunteers and Squidward just fades out of existence. But, okay. Remember that disclaimer we had at the beginning of the episode? We're gonna be saying some things.
I feel like my perspective has changed a bit, so I want to let you get it out of your system first.
Okay. I am going to try and be as civilized and nice as possible when I am discussing this trilogy of films. If there is 2 words that can sum up the entirety of this trilogy, and I do genuinely believe this when I say this, those 2 words are wasted potential. This could have been something interesting. There are so many avenues that this could have gone. There are avenues within the films itself that they could tease it could go, but then they try to do the safe cookie-cutter corporate thing, or, like whatever's popular at the time. It's not necessarily like, oh, we're actually telling a story. It's, we're paint by numbers to try and get as much return as possible. And the second that Star Wars felt corporate was the 7th movie. I liked it at the time because, I was still in the I hate the prequel phase before I learned to, appreciate them. I didn't realize until later that Episode 7 is basically just a carbon copy of A New Hope with just a different coat of paint on it.
And we'll get more into that point when we talk about Force Awakens, which might be sooner than later.
Yeah, okay. But, okay, so then Force Awakens happens. It's cookie cutter. And then they're like, oh, how are they going to follow this up? How's The Last Jedi going to happen? And I know you people are smart. You're smart. Anybody who's smart is listening to our podcast. You're smart people. You know very well what the discourse of this film was when it was released. You know the quagmire of just hate and misinformation and just swirling, churning internet. The internet doing what the internet does best. And there were just people caught in the middle. Oh, you're a bad person if you did like this movie. You're a bad person if you didn't like this movie. It was just like so much.
It was a nightmare.
Vitriol. Like being a Star Wars fan at this juncture in time was not fun at all. And then there were the people who took the fans, the fans of the new trilogy that took it far too seriously, and were actually trying to get the actors themselves to be in relationships, and that was just a mess.
Unfortunately, that's been around since the beginning. I saw an interview with Alec Guinness from the production, after the first film came out. He was like, "Oh yes, and now I get very strange fan mail." Somebody wrote to me like, "Hello, Alec, Mr. Guinness, my wife and I have been having a lot of arguments. Could you come and live in our house for a year and help us settle our affairs right now?" So I feel like a big problem with Star Wars has always been fandom culture.
Okay.
But for good or bad.
But I'm just going to say, social media culture, current social media
Yes.
culture,
Much
skyrocketed this.
It's much worse.
I will admit, yes, fandoms always have been, maybe, a way too passionate, but now that they have access to the internet...
Now they have access to echo chambers.
Oh, echo chambers.
Self-gratification.
Oh, echo chambers have ruined this series. And, again, this is less... Okay, I'm not going to get into any of the, discourse on either side of this, because we're going to try and keep this a civilized discussion.
Now, I'll say this trilogy is actually part of the reason I stopped doing Star Wars videos and started focusing, on My Hero Academia for a while. Antoine Bandelay is another Star Wars YouTuber who did that. He's still talking almost exclusively about Avatar, because the sequel trilogy killed his interest in Star Wars. And it was kind of dead for me for a while, too. I was finding more interest in reading fan fictions from, Clone Wars original trilogy era than I ever was engaging in modern Star Wars media.
And that's sad, because, a lot of people dropped off, and that is evident in, the box office. So, I don't want to dissect what ruined Star Wars, because we're not that kind of channel. But it did have a profound impact on the trilogy. And if you like the trilogy, I'm not saying you're a bad person. You're allowed to like whatever you like.
I rewatched the saga for the purpose of this video, and yeah, I finally got my flame rekindled. I don't know if I'm gonna make more videos in the near future, but I watched through the prequels and the original trilogy, and I got in touch with why I loved the saga in the first place. And even on the sequel trilogy, I will admit, and I'll get more into this when we do the individual rankings, I actually have a lot more respect for the sequel trilogy. Watching them all these years later, I'm finally seeing the good parts that everyone else saw. And
I don't know if I'm in that boat, but
I know. That's why I said we're gonna have some differences.
Oh yeah, no, and absolutely, and that's why this is just gonna be a civil discourse between two people. Who
exactly.
We're going to do what the internet tried and failed to do when these movies were coming out, and have an actual civil discussion.
I know, and it was weird for me watching through them. My dad and I, we watched them together. He kind of made fun of it. He went to the theaters and saw the original trilogy when they were still coming out.
And of course, he definitely watched the originals before, the Lucas special editions with all the extra stuff.
So we were kind of having fun, making some commentary, talking about bad writing. But then in the middle of it, I was starting to have this epiphany where I was seeing the details that they were going for, and I was like, oh, I understand you, movies. I understand you. I still don't love you, but I get you now. It makes sense.
I will admit I haven't come to that epiphany, but okay, here's the thing. I have seen far worse than the sequel trilogy, and Joe can absolutely attest to the fact that I have seen the bottom of the barrel when it comes to entertainment.
When he sits through a bad thing, he explains it to us in full detail so that we can also experience the badness without having to subject ourselves to the torture.
Yeah, I was about to
Just
say...
our friend group.
I was about to say, this is at least, like, you're getting the distilled version without having to suffer it yourself. You're getting, like, you're watching it from afar, whereas I was in the thick of it. I had to watch through the entirety, and I had to dig my hand through the muck, and I had to watch, and I had to suffer. And the only respite I get is to spread that suffering slowly to other people. I have an entire Discord server where I am allowed to rant and rave.
Yeah. He has sent me screenshots of that too. I'm not in it, but I'm on the up and up of the conversation.
Oh yeah, no, like so many people in that particular Discord server, they are like, are you okay? Do you need anything? I'm like, no, I needed this. I needed to get this out of my system.
I feel like...
I love how most of them are from the CW too.
I didn't know we were naming names, but
okay,
yes.
I was about to say, that's as far as we'll go. Like, shows from the CW network.
And don't get me wrong, I got through a good chunk of the CW shows. Like, I am willing to put up with a lot of stupidity.
Oh, our mutual friend, from, you know the specific CW show I am referring to, our mutual friend attempted to watch a single episode after I told them about the entirety of the season 1. He told me he couldn't get halfway through the first episode. He's like, I have no idea how you watched the entire series of this. And I said, I am stubborn. That is how I would not let them best me. That is how I got through. I refused to relent. I refused to give in.
But, I don't know, starting to get back on topic, I feel like part of it, if we're going to talk about the sequel trilogy, we should also probably talk about, like, all the weird myths and rumors about, like, what George Lucas's plan for a sequel trilogy was. Because there's a lot of details out there. I feel like a good chunk of them are probably true, given, like, how many different drafts and rewrites George did on his other stuff. Like, I'm pretty sure at one point in the original trilogy, they were toying with the idea of Boba Fett being revealed to be Luke and Leia's mom. Yeah, I know. I see the look on your face.
Really? That was a thing?
I don't know for sure, but I've heard so many people say it. I think there must be some grain of truth to it.
I was about to say, like, this is the first time I'm hearing this. I'm like, okay, how about we go to that What If comic? yeah, Marvel, get on that. Get into that What If comic.
Padme survived the
Padme
pregnancy.
survived and became Boba Fett.
She murdered the real Boba Fett, stole his armor. She found, like, a voice modulator to make her sound like the clones, and now this is my life now, so this is how the Senate dies, with thunderous applause.
I used a voice modulator to sound like a Kiwi. I don't think that's racist. I think you could call a New Zealander a Kiwi and not be angry.
I thought he was Australian.
No, he's New Zealand.
Huh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, no. I forget the actor's name, but he's from New Zealand.
Aquaman's dad.
Aquaman's dad.
I don't know. There are a lot of things circulating around about what George wanted. There were ideas at one point that he wanted to make Darth Maul the main antagonist, and it was going to be a crime. It was going to be mostly focused on a crime drama.
That could be interesting.
Apparently, at one point, he had the idea that it was mostly going to be about the stormtroopers and their journey after the Empire's disbanded. The people who didn't want to be there, or the people who who liked the Empire. And I guess some of that might have gone into the First Order.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about Finn's story, that is kind of close. Like, of course, they immediately abandoned it after Episode 7, but, like, that was, like, the one part I'm like, keep this train, please! I'm gonna say it, Finn should have been the main character.
I agree.
Finn absolutely should have been the main character of the sequel trilogy.
Something, China wouldn't like it.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I do believe there is some grain of truth to that, but, like...
So does the actor who plays Finn.
Yeah.
But, apparently at some point there was also the idea that, okay, he did say in an interview after the prequel trilogy, he wanted to make a film series separate from Star Wars that was just, like, going all in on the mystical and, like, a weird metaphysical movie that doesn't have much talking at all. But he had an idea. He wanted to delve more into the wills of the Force and look at what makes the Force the Force. which I think most people would have had a problem with if they didn't like the midichlorian thing too, but...
Yeah, and I think most people's problems with the midichlorians is it sort of, how do I put this, demystifies the Force in a way. Because it's... this is going to be a really stupid and out there reference. Mm-hmm. There is a Disney Channel original movie called Hatching Pete, which is about, like, this guy being the high school mascot that's, like, a rooster, and, like, he's learning how to be himself through the mascot. And there's a line in it that I'm like, this was weirdly okay, despite it coming from a Disney Channel original movie. Basically, it's, once you remove the mystery, there goes the magic. And I'm like, I weirdly can apply that to various franchises.
I feel like Star Wars. I feel like because the midichlorian thing was just said as a scientific matter of fact thing, I feel like that's part of what killed it. Like if you look at the way it starts to show up in the Clone Wars, mm-hmm. like Yoda going to meet the wills of the Force, which I think was going to be a big point, and that's, from what I understand, that was something that was always there in Star Wars. Like the original draft of the story, I think Lucas is in his head. The reason he was part of the reason he was filming it as a documentary, he had the idea that the reason that the Star Wars movies are movies is because R2-D2, like centuries later, has met up with the wills of the Force and is explaining to them the story of the Skywalker Saga through his eyes. And like, I don't know, so that if he made a movie like that, it would have been interesting.
Oh, yeah, and actually, on that topic, remember I already previously mentioned the one friend who I told her about Star Wars. Basically, the way I didn't quite go into, like, the midichlorian explanation. The way I explained it is, well, obviously I used the line from the original trilogy, the Force is all around us, it penetrates us, is within every living being. But the way I explained it, which isn't, like this is the most layman thing I could possibly think of. Think of the Force like a seed. It's within every single living thing, but only certain people can nourish that seed and grow it. That is the people who become Jedi.
Exactly. Now that sort of has taken a backseat in more modern Star Wars, because modern Star Wars wants to do the anyone can do it message, which is fine, but I don't think it works for this narrative specifically.
Yeah, I think, like, it's not necessarily... Okay, so greatness can come from anybody,
right?
But, like, there are just certain people that... Like, the way the Force... Like I said, it's in everybody. It's just some people are able to control it, and others just can't. And, like, that's the majority of the universe, actually. Which does make sense. Because, like, you can't have an entire universe populated by people who can use the Force. Like, if every single person knew how to use the Force, the world would be in chaos.
Yup.
Think about it. Starkiller can bring starships out of orbit and crash them into a planet with the flick of his wrist.
Okay, technically that's a bit of an over-exaggeration. It was already crashing down. What he did was redirect it so it didn't crash directly onto people.
Okay, that's a fair point. But see, you moved an entire ship.
Yeah.
Like, that's one person. Imagine an entire planet of somebody with that. Actually, that's... another tie-in comic that, at least these tangents relate to what we're talking about, unlike most other times that we have discussions like this. So there was Tales from the Jedi thing back when Dark Horse had the license. It was pre-everything, so like it was pre-Skywalker Saga. It's the story of why Jedi are not allowed to love, and this could easily be apocryphal because the framing device is a Jedi talking to his Padawan. So theoretically, this story could be apocryphal, but knowing how powerful certain Jedi could be, I don't entirely doubt it. Basically, the gist of the story is two brothers fell in love with the same girl, and they were both a Jedi, and they basically decided to duel over her. And they were so heated and angry that the complete, like all the Force energy building within them, destroyed the entirety of the planet. And that is why Jedi are not allowed to love. And I'm like, okay, you know, Darth Nihilus exists, and he's a planet vampire, and he, like, eats entire planets, so, like, I don't entirely discount it, because, like, theoretically, yeah, and like I said earlier, Jarl Poof held an entire planet together, and eventually killed him, but...
You're right.
So I'm not going to discount that.
I feel like the people who make the jokes about, like, haha, Lucas wrote the no marriage rule in there just because he was going through a divorce at that time. I feel like they seriously underestimate how much that impacted the whole writing. Like, I don't know. I feel like the star-crossed lovers is such a big deal in writing and storytelling anyway.
It's a trope as old as time.
Yeah, exactly.
Before even Shakespeare did the most famous star-crossed lovers story, it's been a story.
It's because we as a human race find it compelling. People who are in love and want to be together, but can't because of circumstances beyond their control.
It is literally a tale as old as time.
Weren't we talking about the sequel trilogy?
Oh yeah, that's right.
I also want to clarify. People talk about like, oh, the sequels are so bad. They should have just adapted the comics that followed post Return of the Jedi. I feel like this is a bit of a hot take. I think there's a lot of really stupid ideas in the comics that follow Return of the Jedi. Because like, I give them credit because at the time, the ones that are made like right after Return of the Jedi, like the Yuzhong Vong War and the Throne trilogy, and Dark M, all that, they had no frame of reference for what Star Wars was. They had 3 movies and nothing else. So they once in a while they would have like, hey George, is it okay if we do this? Oh yeah, sure, you can do that. Can we do this? No, that doesn't work. Okay, well rewrite. How about this? Okay, yeah, that works. Great, cool, great. So that, which also I feel like takes away from people saying that the tie-in expanded universe is fan fiction. Because they had that creative control from the very beginning.
And the fact that they had Lucas's blessing does give a little validity and credence to them.
The reason Chewbacca died in the one story was because Chewbacca was the only person that George gave them permission to kill in that story, because he wanted their journeys to last a lot longer than that.
Oh yeah, I forgot Chewbacca dies in the extended universe.
Spoiler alert!
Well, it's from the 90s, so it's like a 30, 40-year-old thing.
But yeah,
oh yeah, spoiler alert. Your characters will eventually grow old and die. Spoilers!
Or they'll be killed by new characters coming in the stories.
Oh yeah. We definitely have no frame of reference for that in a certain movie trilogy that I understand you have a newfound appreciation for, but I don't necessarily believe I do.
Well, how about on that point we get into the ranking?
Okay. I want you to go first.
Okay.
I want you to go first.
So we went back and forth, and oh my lord, I just realized I had half expected this to just be like our general thoughts of like 20 minutes and then get right into it. We've been talking for nearly an hour.
Oh yeah, well,
anyway,
par for the course for us, really.
That's true. But we had a discussion about this in our group chat. We were texting back and forth about it. We were like, okay, I think we need to set ground rules for what constitutes a Star Wars movie that we're going to be ranking, because then people will be like, what about this, or what about this? So,
we are not doing the Ewok films!
You are very passionate about this fact. What did they do to you, man?
Everything.
Okay, so with the ground rules we set...
Okay, like, in all seriousness, I thought the first one was boring, and then the first one has the most what the hell opening of anything.
I saw like a small part of it decades ago. I have no frame of reference. They're on Disney Plus though, so I might watch them soon.
Okay, I was about to say that I won't tell you because the beginning, like, okay, the first movie is like, it's not holiday special, but it's pretty close. And then the opening of the second one, I'm like, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god, what is happening? What is happening? Oh my god. If you watch it, you can confirm this to me in our group chat.
Okay,
okay. If you have the same feelings as I did.
Okay.
But I'm like, it also has been a while for me since I've seen them, so I'm like,
If I had not rewatched the whole saga before making this, I would probably have a much different list than I have now.
Oh, probably. Anyway, the ground rules, we did live-action theatrical releases. We debated the Clone Wars movie, but I figured, I wanted to do it, but then we decided...
Well, it's not that I didn't want to do it, I just didn't know that you had something prepared for it. I didn't.
I wouldn't necessarily say I had something prepared. It's just, like, it was a talking point.
But... we're not gonna go into like all the shows. We're not gonna go into Clone Wars, Rebels, Mandalorian, Obi-Wan, Andor, all that other stuff. We can save that for another day, maybe.
I will say I like Andor and I like the first 2 seasons of Mandalorian.
I thought 3 was decent.
3 had problems.
I'm in the weird minority that liked the episode with Jack Black and...
Okay, I don't think it was awful. I just thought,
it was
like,
fun.
I just was like, why?
I just enjoyed it, you know?
It was a political thriller, and there are aspects of it I liked. Mm-hmm. I was just like, why?
I liked the world building.
But the world building was interesting. All right, let's... Okay.
Anyway.
Okay, what's your bottom of the list? Let's hear it.
My number 11. You wanted me to go first. So, my number 11 is The Force Awakens.
Really?
Uh-huh. I told you, my opinion changed.
Okay.
I feel like most of the problems in Episode 8 and Episode 9 are directly because of Seven's lack of foresight.
You know what? I have a difficult time disagreeing with you.
I will quote this interview to people until the day I die. J.J. Abrams actually agrees with me. He talks about, like, in the one interview he did leading up to Rise of Skywalker, he was like, did we make a Star Wars movie where a person from a desert goes and learns to become a Jedi and a big space station blows up at the end of it? Yes, we did. I just want to clarify. We just wanted to make a film that was like what people knew before we went off to do something different. Now, if you thought that The Force Awakens was terrible, I have nothing but respect for you. And if you thought it was really good, I question your sanity.
I'm not in that boat. Let's just say I am not in that boat.
Right, right. I mean, it's not the bottom of yours, obviously.
It's not. Yeah, it is absolutely not the bottom of mine. But
I don't know. I feel like my big problem with Force Awakens is, I was in the group. I liked the prequels, but I also liked 7 when it first came out. I was like, oh yeah, that was a good movie. I want to see where it goes.
I was also in that group because, like, again, as I said earlier in the podcast, I was in my, I'm too cool for the prequels thing.
Uh-huh.
And then eventually that changed.
But, I feel like my big problem with The Force Awakens is the fact that they have the characters. It feels like who the characters are on screen and what their origin story is, it feels like it's two different things, almost. Because, like, Finn and Rey, too happy, man. They are too happy-go-lucky. You have Rey, who is a scavenger, who has not talked to many people and has had a life just sitting in the dust, just doing what it takes to survive. One of the things I will say about the prequels and the original trilogy, even with the bad parts, Lucas is still really good at fleshing out characters and making sure that their story is consistent.
Absolutely.
And, like, I don't know, Finn, the reformed killer stormtrooper, as people started calling him in other circles, I don't know. I like the idea that his first mission, he wasn't totally programmed the way everyone else was, so he was mortified and ran. I like that, but also, he just acts too much like a normal guy.
And that's a fair point.
And
yeah, no, if they took exactly what I said earlier, if they took that ball and rolled with it and made him the main focus, I absolutely would have followed this trilogy.
Yeah, I wish he acted a little bit more like a soldier. Like, I feel like his personality should be a little bit closer to the clones than, a Marvel character.
And that is, again, my main problem with the sequel trilogy. They're writing it like they're Marvel movies, because that's what was popular at the time.
And also, Force Awakens, they went in with no plan. They had no overall...
They fully admit that they had no plan with this trilogy.
Yeah, exactly. That's why there's so many... I remember Force Awakens, when it first came out, we were all debating about, like, what about the mystery box and what's going to be inside the mystery box. Like,
turns out it was nothing.
Who is Rey connected to? Who is Snoke? Like, yeah, there are things that, okay, in hindsight, still work with the story we got, but, like, I don't know. There's a lot of parts of it that feel like they weren't really consistent.
Yeah, no, like, the fact that they had no plan shows, and I will get into that when I get into an entry that I will talk about eventually. But yeah, no, they clearly had no plan. My number 11?
Yeah, go ahead, man.
Okay, my number 11. And we are not delving too far away. Last Jedi is my number 11. I look forward to your explanations, because I know we've talked prior to this. So clearly it is higher than your number 11, so I will definitely be willing to hear you out.
Okay.
Okay, so here is my problem with The Last Jedi.
Go on.
Rian Johnson decided to throw out what came before and create something new, but never followed through with any of the different threads. That was my basic problem with the movie. There are so many threads that could have gone and could have made an interesting direction, and then they just abandon it and do what's safe and marketable. And that's my main thing. And not only that, and, people are going to say what they will by what I'm about to say next. I do not like what they did with Luke's character. And that is going to be, prime fodder for things, but, no. The person who saw the good in Darth Vader, the person who saw the good in the Youngling Killer 5000, immediately took one side glance at his nephew and said, "This man has got to go." Okay, admittedly, he does admit that, yes, it was just like a quick, fleeting thought, and the lightsaber ignites, and that's so that way, they're both right. Him and Ren are both right. But, I just, no. That doesn't see... And then him being just a miserable hermit who abandoned everything and is just living on the planet sad. And then, and of course Rey is the only main character not to lose a limb by the second movie. Not to really lose anything, really, in terms of things. Okay, so, my biggest problem with The Last Jedi, if they actually followed through with Kylo Ren's offer at the end and said, "Hey, let's burn it all to the ground and start something new." If Rey had accepted his offer, I would be singing a different tune. Because at least that's something different. But no, they played something safe and marketable. And the unfortunate thing that we have to relate to real-life tragedy, they kept Carrie Fisher alive, and they killed off Mark Hamill, which is very unfortunate because Carrie Fisher had passed away and Mark Hamill was still around. And that was unfortunate. And, of course, Leia Mary Poppinsing her way back into this. It was really dumb when I first saw it. Then I watched it later, and I'm like, okay, I feel less watching it the next time. Mm-hmm. But still, I'm like, And, okay, they did not have to kill Luke through the Force projection. I really doubt it is that much of a strain on his body. Yarl Poof only died after he held an entire planet together. I really don't think him projecting the equivalent of a movie projector a few planets away is that much of a... Because it was on the Outer Rim. Theoretically, it really wasn't that far away because Rey got there pretty quick.
That actually leads me to one of my criticisms of the sequel. I guess I should have spoken about this when we talked about our general thoughts. Mm-hmm. One of my big problems of the sequel trilogy is it just happens too fast. Mm-hmm. Original trilogy, A New Hope happens over a couple days, and then there's a 3-year gap, and then we have Empire. Mm-hmm. And that takes place over a few weeks. Then we go right into... Return of the Jedi, but there's a year gap between those two stories.
And that brings up a point that I have for Last Jedi. Are you really telling me that this is the entirety of the Rebel Alliance being chased by the entirety of the First Order? It's a single ship, so how scattershot is the First Order? We never really get an explanation on, how many planets are falling in love. We never really understand what they do. Admittedly, in the original, the Empire was just the bad guys. That got more fleshed out in the prequel trilogy and showed how Palpatine seized power. How he, eventually went from government to government, and especially in the supplemental material, such as the Clone Wars television series. But even in the supplemental material, we don't really get a good through line for the First Order. I mean... Okay, we're gonna... Actually, no. I'm gonna save that for when I talk about Rise of Skywalker. But...
Well, okay. While we're still talking about our number 11s, that's also one of the problems I had with The Force Awakens. I feel like it went a little too on the nose with, trying to make the First Order like the Empire. Escalation, I will say, was one of its big problems.
Yeah, it's the Death Star, but it's the size of a planet, and it can hit multiple planets. Oh, yeah, and I think I still have these photos from... actually, no, I will get to those photos when we get to the Rise of Skywalker, because, oh my goodness, do I have an entire rant for Rise of Skywalker when we get to it.
The novelization of The Force Awakens has so many weird choices. I think you brought this up, too, and we were making fun of it at the time. the reason that everyone can see all the planets blowing up across the galaxy. What was it? They made like a deal with cultists to make sure everybody could see it?
Oh yeah, basically it's like, okay, so we're going to beam essentially the equivalent of a movie camera into the atmosphere of various rebel-aligned planets so they can actually see the lasers going up and blowing things despite the fact that they're light years away.
And that would be a really interesting idea if it were explored in the movie itself, but it's not. It's something they wrote into the novelization to
and then you just think about
flaw.
And then you just think about it in the movie. I'm like, how can you see the planet? Are these planets really close to this particular planet? Mm-hmm. You're not really going to be striking fear into the hearts of people if you, like, maybe the people on this planet see it happen.
I'm not the first person to bring this up, but also the movie really failed to understand how to present stakes. Because, like, if you just see a bunch of planets burn up and explode, yeah, we don't really have any indication of who they are or what they did, just that these are big targets in the Republic.
When they blew up Alderaan in A New Hope, we knew what Alderaan was through Leia.
Exactly. Also, that scene, I understand what they were going for. The original trilogy, I'm not gonna lie to you and say that they were like very subtle with their political themes either. Like, they're literally called stormtroopers. Hello.
Yeah.
But here we just have a guy standing on stage trying to do a Hitler impression, and all the stormtroopers heil. Like, real subtle there, guys.
Yeah,
I wonder what this is.
I know the original wasn't subtle, but, like, this is subtle comparatively.
Yeah, the original trilogy, it's like they're poking you in the back of the neck, being like, haha, see, guess what we're going for? And prequel trilogy is less subtle, more passive aggressive. They're like hitting you on the back of the head,
and like shaking your shoulders.
See? This one is sequel trilogy is water torture, where they have you like strung up to the wall and they're squirting you in the face, like, get it, see?
Like the Clockwork Orange thing where he's got the eyes open. Turn it off! And that's definitely how I feel watching The Last Jedi. Oh yeah, and the fact that, Luke dies, and then no fanfare whatsoever. There's just, Rey walks up to Leia, he was at peace. I'm like, really? Leia, you're not going to have any reaction whatsoever to your brother dying. You're not going to have any reaction.
I think that was because she had like a few minutes to process that.
I mean, that's a fair point, but we want to see her reaction.
I get you.
And okay, that was the one thing I will give Rise of Skywalker. The one thing I will give that, when they tell the main people that Leia dies, spoilers, Chewbacca is rightfully inconsolable. Like, that is something that we needed.
Hey, that brings me to another thing I hated about The Force Awakens. The Han death is really good, but at the end, I know I'm not the first person to make fun of this, we get Leia's reaction there where she feels it through the Force and is shocked, but it doesn't do enough, and then when Chewbacca shows up, she just walks right past him.
And does not hug him.
She's never met this girl.
Robot Chicken made fun of this.
Yes, I know.
I love the Robot Chicken sketch, though. She goes out of her way to hug everybody but Chewbacca.
And she shoves him out of the way when she goes to talk to Rey.
I'm like, I don't love mean-spirited humor a lot, but, like, that got me. I'm like, okay, that's funny. Like, clearly the Robot Chicken creators are on our side in terms of that. Mm-hmm. And we're like, okay, we agree with the fans on this one. All right, I guess we should move on to our number 10s.
Yeah, I suppose so. All right, how about we both say what our number 10s are, and then we'll go individually.
Okay, you go first.
Okay, my number 10 is The Last Jedi.
Rise of Skywalker.
Okay. So, The Last Jedi for me, I feel like I can put it above Force Awakens with a good conscience, because I feel like a lot of it comes down to the problems that were handed to the director from Force Awakens storytelling. Force Awakens is the movie that was like, oh, by the way, Luke Skywalker is gone because his whole Jedi Order was destroyed. Another Skywalker turned evil, and now we're here, and the Republic and the Empire are at war again. They just have new names. And, yeah, I don't know. I feel like Last Jedi was just given a bad hand from the beginning. So the fact that they got... And I'll even say that with Rise of Skywalker, too, when I get to it. Obviously, it's not on my list yet, so inherently it is higher than Last Jedi and The Force Awakens on my list.
Yep.
I feel like... I
still am your friend. Even though you are wrong, I am still your friend. Okay,
No, you're good.
You're not
good.
wrong.
But anyway, I remember I was a part of the group that made fun of the director. You know, haha, Ruin Johnson destroyed my childhood. Jake Skywalker.
Yeah, and I'm gonna be lying if I said I wasn't at least mentally in that space.
Mm-hmm. So, I don't know. Ryan Johnson, in the years since I've been exposed to more of his work, I've begun to really respect him as a person. I really, really like a lot of his
Oh, no,
other
absolutely.
stuff.
I don't think he's a bad person. I just don't think he was the right fit for The Last Jedi.
Right. I think I really like Knives Out. He directed 2 of my favorite episodes of Breaking Bad. And
I forgot he did that.
I feel like Ryan Johnson, if he had been allowed to make his own trilogy apart from the Skywalker Saga, it would have worked really well. That being said, Last Jedi also has some of his flaws. The stuff, I don't know, it almost feels like Knives Out is really, really good because it learned from some of the mistakes The Last Jedi made. Especially with, like, the political nuance, Knives Out is a lot more subtle. Last Jedi, they're just standing there on the balcony. There's only one business in the galaxy that gets you this rich. War. I'd like to punch a hole in this whole broken system.
Yeah, like, sadness, political subject. Oh, yes, like, the working class is stranded upon on this weird casino planet.
And we're not saying they're right or wrong, but they need to be a little bit better than that.
I was about to say, like
it.
there's a thing called subtlety. Admittedly, Star Wars isn't great at that.
Right. I don't know. I feel like I can see some of the problems. I realized at some point a lot, like, my problems with, like, Rey and stuff are Disney problems that were forced onto Ryan. Like, when he's allowed to write his own female characters, he's really good at it. But Rey, I don't know. Rey is solely carried by the charisma of Daisy Ridley, in my opinion. I feel like the narrative isn't interested in making her interesting.
Oh yeah, no, the only bits of likableness is from Daisy Ridley herself, because
Right.
the writing is not doing this woman favors.
True. And I don't know, I feel like, okay, I will say Ryan Johnson, his perspective as a director, he's said this a few times, he hates a film where everyone has the same opinion about it. Like, he wants films that people can discuss. Like, he doesn't like films...
Oh, he got his wish with
I
Last
know.
Jedi. He absolutely got his wish with Last Jedi.
And there are certainly problems with Ryan Johnson's writing. Stuff that definitely wasn't from Disney. Like, the man who wrote a scene where a girl, in camera shot, vomits all over the guy... I can believe that guy would also write a scene where Luke is milking a weird alien in manatee and like drinking milk straight from its cleavage, which is disgusting.
Yep.
But I feel like Ryan Johnson, he's really good at slapstick, and he's really good at physical comedy. That shined in his first Breaking Bad episode he directed.
Something I will admit from Last Jedi, I admired the fact that they brought back the Yoda puppet. They didn't make him CGI. I'm like, I will give them that.
Another thing I feel like Ryan Johnson, I feel like he also hated the idea of Luke being an old hermit who was bitter and jaded. So, because that was the deal that was given to him by The Force Awakens, he worked with it and made Luke do that and then gave him an arc. Because that is Luke's journey. I feel like he was trying to give Luke the arc that, like, Peter Parker had in the Spider-Verse movie, the first one. And it just fell short.
That. Yeah.
It just fell short a little bit.
Because it didn't feel like Luke.
I feel like it does feel a lot like Luke. It's just in a totally wrong context. Cinema Therapy did a video a couple months ago where they talked about The Last Jedi, and the one guy who makes the movies for the living, he talked about how, like, it is understandable that a person who was heroic and optimistic and might become cynical in their older years, especially if they've gone through as much trauma as Luke did. The problem is that we're watching a movie where it's just not as rewarding to the viewer if the person regresses and has that far of a consequence. Like, I understand Luke having a bad day. Like, I don't know, to me it almost feels like if Avatar: The Last Airbender did a sequel where Zuko started being like, oh man, what if my father had a point? What if the Fire Nation? And
And yeah, that's a digression of his character, which is why I don't love, which is why it's at my bottom.
I will also say to your point about like Luke and Kylo both being right. I don't think it's that they're both right. I think it's that there's that they just had different perspectives. Because like Luke, like Force Awakens gives you the idea that Kylo turned on his master, and Last Jedi is saddled with that perspective. So like, what could Luke Skywalker, the great guy we remember, what could he have possibly done to make a student turn on him and accept the dark side? Like, Anakin Skywalker, yeah, Darth Vader's an awful person, but you watch the prequel trilogy and you get exactly why he was trying to kill Obi-Wan in the end there. But for Last Jedi, the first time he tells the story, it's like, oh man, I went to go confront him, and it was dark, and he was dark, and it was awful, and I just mind my own business, and then he tried to murder me, and he murdered all the kids. I don't think that's him telling the story because he's ashamed of what actually happened. Because what happened is, even after all this time, that instinct is still there. That Skywalker impulse that he and Leia both inherited from actually both their parents. Because Anakin, like,
Padme has a secret past of murdering children.
but like, I don't know. But I feel like Luke, what happened was he went to go wake up Ben, and then I don't know if it was him seeing the vision or somebody like Snoke or Palpatine. Maybe they're the same person.
I mean, that's kind of implied in Skywalker, Rise of Skywalker, that they're the same person.
Yeah, he grew them in a jar. But anyway, so Luke saw that vision of Ben rising up and destroying everything that he had spent his whole life. So in that single moment of instinct, he drew his sword out of fear. And then he immediately realizes, yeah, no, I'm not doing this. This isn't the way to go. But Ben woke up and saw him standing over him with his lightsaber. And because Snoke / Palpatine had been manipulating him all this time.
Yes, but if they verbalize that maybe Snoke had, like, if Snoke had a throwaway, if Snoke did anything in the freaking trilogy, if Snoke had a throwaway line in the throne room at the end saying that I clouded the thoughts of Luke Skywalker, maybe I would buy it.
I mean, why would he say that in front of Kylo though? Because that would guarantee that Kylo turns on him.
I mean,
still
how? Okay, I have a problem with that whole scene too.
Okay, go ahead.
Oh yes, I can sense he's about to strike his foe with the lightsaber. Oh no.
Okay, that's fair.
I'm like, really? You can't sense that your lightsaber is moving next to you? You can link people's minds so they share the same physical space, and you can't sense that the thing next to you is moving? I understand that Palpatine is playing VR chat and he's controlling the Snoke clone.
That's a fun way to describe it, actually.
That is exactly how I believe that's going to... He's hooked up to a Chuck E. Cheese animatronic arm.
Honestly, I will give them credit. They weren't planning to make Palpatine.
Oh yeah, I will get to that.
But when I watched The Last Jedi again, in hindsight, knowing that he was going to be revealed to be Palpatine, a lot of his dialogue tracks with Palpatine. It's interesting.
Well, of course,
knowing that
they
Palpatine
didn't know.
The strings. Yeah, they didn't know either.
They didn't know, so they just were ripping off Palpatine.
Yeah, it's one of those things that's cool in hindsight, you know. But even the small stuff, like this, like when him taking out his rage on Hux is stupid, and that's one of my problems, that Rian Johnson doesn't respect Hux as a character, and he makes him into a joke. But
the trilogy doesn't respect Hux as a character.
But like, you know, there was an interview with J.J. Abrams where he was talking about like how he was trying to explore the differences between Kylo and Hux in The Force Awakens, and he wanted the tension there. It was going to be different than Vader and Tarkin working together.
Okay, but the one cool scene I will give of The Last Jedi, when Kylo's unconscious and Hux is about to shoot him in the head, and then he puts the gun away when he realizes he's awake. I'm like, okay, that scene stuck out to me.
Yeah, I like those moments, but I'm thinking of like, okay, it was stupid that Snoke just shows up on the hologram in the middle of the room after the Resistance gets away and just starts ragdolling him in front of all the people. But then after Hux goes to his throne room and reports to him and tells him what's going on, his real plan, and Kylo comes in, at this point, Snoke, he has the line where, I don't know the exact line, but he's like, this is why you allow people like this, because their need to prove themselves breeds ingenuity, something like that. I don't know. I really liked the line.
Mm-hmm.
I'll probably go watch the scene again and then put it on screen.
And then I'm thinking about the whole ragdolling thing. You think that, like, you know, Palpatine just had, like, an Alzheimer's spell? And he was just, like, he forgot how his powers worked. He's, oh, no. You know, you can't really control things at my age.
Either that or it was just harder for him because he's controlling the puppet who is using the Force to control him.
Okay, so I'm going to use the Force on the puppet, and the puppet is going to use the Force by itself. I haven't figured out the logistics yet.
This puppet that we are going to reveal in later lore, that it was like grown from like a little bit of me and a little bit of Luke's hand. And
oh yes, like yeah, because we're not even going to talk about Luke. And yes, we had this discussion. Go watch our video on which Star Wars characters can lift Mjolnir. All right, shall I talk about Rise of Skywalker now?
Go right ahead.
Okay, so the reason I rank it slightly above Last Jedi is because, as much as I hate Rise of Skywalker, at least it's entertainingly bad. It is so entertaining how little of a care that they had when creating this movie, and that the fact that they released the movie without knowing who the main villain was going to be, and they just kind of added in later in the editing bay. And the reason I know this is because, you know, those DK books, the things that are like, visual dictionaries?
Mm-hmm.
So they released it not too long before the movie was released, of Episode 9. Guess which character is not in the book? The main villain. Palpatine is not in the book, which shows how late in production he was added in. As a matter of fact, I want to read a few excerpts from this. So, fact file. Finn's role in destroying Starkiller was incidental to his true loyalty. He infiltrated the facility in hopes of rescuing Rey. This is, this is why I hate The Last Jedi, so this is, like, carrying over. Mm-hmm. Now seeking to keep Rey away from a doomed fleet, Finn attempts to escape, but is caught by Rose Tico. He is only a true hero when he attempts to sacrifice himself at the end. Really, he was never a hero before that. Before that exact moment where he's about to ram into the cannon, and then Rose Tico immediately takes that victory away from him.
See, I understand why you're mad, but I also understand what they're saying. To an extent.
Oh, here's another one. Borrowed lightsaber. When Luke rejects his old lightsaber, Rey's scavenger instincts cause her to retrieve it and claim it as her own.
Okay, that is a little silly. That was probably written by some unpaid intern.
Life on Jakku. What passes for an economy on Jakku consists of raiding hulking ruins after the Battle of Jakku nearly 30 years earlier, shipping them from the salvage machinery. Rey becomes well versed with the technology, instinctually understanding how pieces go together to make a greater whole. By reactivating long-dormant flight simulators within the cockpit of the old destroyed Star Destroyer, she hones her piloting skills to a fine point, unknowingly bolstered by an innate connection to the Force. Okay, admittedly, that might have been an explanation, except for the line in The Force Awakens when Finn asks her how she managed to pilot this, and she says, I don't know.
See, okay, you know how you always, when you were telling me about the CW shows that you were suffering through, and I would just, in my brain, I would think it through and be like, but then wouldn't they be able to do this, and then it would make more sense? And then you should be like, no, you're putting too much thought into it. You just read that to me, and that honestly explains so much. If that had actually been in the movie, like I told you my idea in the Mjolnir episode, that I had the idea that she had holocrons that she found in her scavenging, that gave her information about...
And that would subtly hint that she's a Jedi, because only Jedi can open them. And, like, hardcore fans will know that, but, like, the generic movie-going public won't.
Yeah, and that not only is that a great way to bring back the past actors, but it's also a great way to explain how she knows how to do things. Like, I don't know, if she had a holocron that had Anakin Skywalker in it, Anakin Skywalker literally would rather be anywhere else, so he just starts talking about his own hobbies that don't include Jediism. Like, Obi-Wan wandered away to the bathroom during the recording, and Anakin was like, so don't tell anybody this, but I've been pod racing on Coruscant in secret, and this is the trick. And here's how you fly a ship. This is how you fix an engine.
He is the best pilot in the galaxy. The Resistance. Okay, we're gonna read this one too. It seems like Leia Organa alone saw the coming storm, the movements of political players across the New Republic, and subsequent secession of worlds to become the territorial heart of the First Order seemed too sculpted to be happenstance. She was also politically compromised at the time when she could have been most effective, and ousted from the New Republic Senate by the scandalous revelation that Darth Vader was her father.
I think that was something from the lore that was written after the movie, but that's not the first time I've heard that, of course.
Events were intended to sideline her, give her the freedom to operate outside the confines of the New Republic Protocol to build the Resistance, but they don't specify if the First Order was from the New Republic or if it's a separate entity entirely. They don't explain it.
I feel like this really is a good way to segue into the conversation about, like, the reason the sequels feel so much more empty. Like, we didn't need the backstory for the original trilogy because the original trilogy is all that we knew. There was nothing there. The sequel trilogy is a sequel, so it's existing, and there's this time gap between point B and point C. So we want to know what happened from point B to point C, because point B ended on this note where it was talking about how it was going to go into this direction, and I don't mind that point C didn't go into that direction, but I want to know how we got to point C. You know?
Yeah, that's a fair point. And, okay, so like I said...
Like, if they had a bunch of, like, Star Wars TV shows leading up to the movies, where they put all that lore in there about, like... about, like, Leia losing her seat in the Senate and, like, going to go start a resistance group.
Although that would be the MCU method, and I'm not a huge fan of that, because
That's
then
fair.
you have to be, like, part of, like, a streaming service, and then you got other commitments to make, and I'm like, I understand why that model would be effective, but I also understand the people that couldn't afford it, so... Like, you're getting crucial information from these shows that you can't get otherwise.
Well, I didn't say they had to be streaming exclusives.
And that's a fair point.
Just make them better circulated.
Also...
Okay, so my plan, I'm going to, like, use you, and, I have, like, Star Destroyers with, Death Star-powered cannons on all of them. How I didn't have this technology before is beyond me, and how I made to do it on this, like, desolate rock that you need a special holocron to even get to.
It's been 30 years, man. Technology is allowed to progress.
But it was on, like, clearly this was around because it was on Vader's castle in Mustafar. And, like, then the other one is like, okay, you gotta go find the knife. The knife is matching exactly for the wreckage of the second Death Star that somehow has not eroded in the past 30 years. And,
Right. I'm with you there.
And then, okay, so then, wait a minute. If there's only 2 of these things in existence, how are you gonna get the ships off of planet? If there's only 2 of these things in existence, how are you going to get the Resistance to show up in the end? If there's only 2 of these things in existence, how do you extrapolate the data to other nav computers when you say you need this specific thing if you don't physically have it?
I'll get to that when I talk about my ranking.
Oh, also,
Okay, so, like, I want you to kill me so I can possess your body and become super... Oh, yeah, by the way, remember how last movie, he said that you were nothing and that your parents were, like, drinkers? So we're gonna retcon that and say that technically your parents were nothing, but I'm your grandpappy. So I... Also,
You keep talking, I'm just gonna close that window
Yes, of
out
course.
there because it's past sunset.
Oh, yes, for some reason, I'm also, like, I had a wife at some point, I guess? But then, weird supplemental material says that he's not my son, he's just a clone of me that somehow didn't have my Force essence, yet is enough of a genetically different person because I'm not played by Ian McDermott in the flashback. And then, wait, you're like 7 when your parents were killed. How do you not remember? Did you repress that? You were like 7. You're at the age where you could form memories. So how do you not remember your parents blowing up by the weird, like, alien thing? Oh yeah, and okay, so he was also like a sympathizer of the Empire, right? So he was like literally driving around with like the Imperial symbol in town. I'm like, isn't that basically like somebody in like the 1960s Germany driving around with, you know, the symbol that we're not allowed to talk about in this, friend? Because, you know, if we don't want to get, like, you know, demonetized.
You're right.
Like, I feel that equivalent is going to be a thing. And then, okay, so my plan is to have you kill me so I can possess your body, right? And then, all of a sudden, I realized, wait a minute, you're connected in the Force, I guess. So I'm going to completely change my plan and steal your force energy from the two of you, and then I'm going to get most of my body... Oh yeah, we never really explained how I survived blowing up twice. I mean, I guess in Italian novel they say that I was puppeteered by the weird Sith necromancers that are in my Colosseum that don't actually do anything. They just kind of yell.
You're right.
Yep, they're there. I guess they're controlling the Chuck E. Cheese robot arm that's holding me up. Like, I'm blind and I'm missing a few fingers. That's really all I got. Okay, I like the idea that this is like their way out. Was like, oh yeah, he used the Veil of the Force to escape into a different timeline and was mildly scarred. And I'm like, okay, I mean, I guess there are technically the mirrors from the Veil of the Force in the background of the one shot with Evil Ray. So I'm like, okay, I guess that's a possibility. But like, really? Okay, so then, oh yes, I'm going to magically steal your life force, I guess. And then I'm going to magically get a fly set of, like, red robes. Because apparently Force can make clothes now. There are many. Of course, being a baller is definitely one of the best dark side powers. Being an absolute baller with a red cloak. And then I'm just going to pointlessly shoot lightning into the sky and destroy a bunch of my own ships for some reason. And then the girl is going to hold 2 lightsabers together after being given a pep talk by some ghosts, shooting my own lightning back at me, killing me, which is the thing I wanted her to do originally, and I guess I'm not going to possess her body just because the movie's over. Even though it's literally my plan.
Don't worry, I will address all of that.
Rey Skywalker. No, you're Rey Palpatine, shut up.
Yeah.
If the last shot of that movie was her eyes glinting yellow, I would have taken back everything I said.
That would be interesting.
I'm like, oh my god, it worked! Because I'm like, you literally did the thing he said he wanted you to do, and it somehow didn't work. I'm sorry, I have a lot of problems. Which is weird. I rank this higher than Last Jedi, yet I am ranting more for this one. And that's probably because I enjoy this kind of thing. That's why I watch the CW shows. I like trash, and I like ranting about trash. Because this is creatively stupid. This is creatively dumb, and I like talking about it. Like, they did not care when making this movie, and it is very evident. Okay, I guess we're moving on now.
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, you're done. Sorry, my god. I have a lot of things to say.
Oh, don't worry about it. I get you.
Okay, I guess you say your number 10, I say my number 10, then you go.
Wait, we just did number 10.
Oh, right, sorry, I had the thing where I had the Clone Wars thing in there, and I forgot to remove it.
Sorry.
So, okay, so our number 9.
I didn't intend this, but mine is Rise of Skywalker, so your talk about The Last Jedi allowed me to segue into mine about The Last Jedi, and your Rise of Skywalker allows me to immediately segue into mine.
All right,
Go ahead with yours.
My number 9 is Solo.
Oh, interesting.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, Rise of Skywalker. Most of what you said is true. The dialogue is really bad. I'll go as far as to say Rise of Skywalker has the most Marvel dialogue in it of any of the trilogy. And
somehow Palpatine returned.
Well, not even that. I have been saying this for years. There are 2 scenes where it feels like they're just the same conversation in 2 different contexts. You were a spice runner? You were a stormtrooper? You were a spice runner? You were a Jedi? We could do this all night. I don't have all night. I'll ask you this one time. What master do you serve? Am I supposed to say Jesus? You're from Earth. I'm not from Earth, I'm from Detroit. Yeah, that's on Earth. I swear.
Yeah, that is the most Marvel that it's gotten. Like, absolutely, Rise of Skywalker is the most Marvel that it's got. Oh, and the thing with 3PO, right? Okay, so I guess Anakin programmed the ancient Sith language into his database somehow when he was created.
People have made that joke. I think it was Padme who did that, because he says it was Republic code that forbids it. And because he worked for a Republic senator for several years.
Hey, 3PO. There's this thing called pen and paper. You can write down what it says.
Do you think his hands have that good? He is a very old droid.
Put a marker, tie it to a finger, and write it on a wall. You're saying you don't have dry erase board technology in this vastly superior Star
But if
system.
his protocol I don't know. I'm not trying to defend it because, as though I like it, but I'm saying there's at least there's more thought put in than it looks like at hand. Like, I think it's stupid that the whole plot device is them trying to find the Wayfinder. It's just one more MacGuffin for them. A New Hope had a MacGuffin because the whole plot was about escorting R2 because R2 has the Death Star plans. But they had way more going for it, like character moments that drove it forward. And I'll even say Rise of Skywalker, it has this big, like, I made the thing about escalation. Rise of Skywalker gets ridiculous. I defended Palpatine having the technology, but that doesn't mean that I don't think the technology to have all the Star Destroyers have all the Death Star technology on it is stupid, because I do think it's very stupid.
Again, how are you getting off the planet?
That's the thing, though. Palpatine explains it when he's talking about it. So they need the two, they use the two Wayfinders. That's how... Those are the only way you can find it, because it's not on any navigation chart, and it's hidden through the Force, so people can't find it. You can't just, like, stretch out and sense it. You have to know. You either have to find it through the Wayfinder, or you have to know where it is. But
didn't they say they specifically needed it to navigate the cosmic storm surrounding the planet?
I don't remember that being in the movie. I just watched it the other night. If it is, maybe I was just looking at my phone at the time. But the way it's framed in the movie. So Rey gets the Wayfinder, Kylo smashes it, hoping that she'll go with him at that point. Now, this is a big problem. I don't get why Snoke was trying to kill Rey if this was the plan all along. I think it would have been a lot better if Palpatine found out she was his granddaughter, like, in that scene. Like, if they had this plan from the beginning that I don't know.
They didn't!
I know, that's my point. A lot of the ideas they had in Rise of Skywalker, if these were the ideas from the beginning of the trilogy, it would have worked. Nostalgia Critic talked a little bit about that in his review of Rise of Skywalker. Mm-hmm. Palpatine is the main antagonist of the first 6. He started this whole journey. The only reason Qui-Gon found Anakin in the first place is because Palpatine set up that whole plan with the trade crisis to get himself to the position of chancellorship. So having the story end with him is a nice bookend. But him being tacked on last minute is what made it bad. That, and also taking away from Anakin's sacrifice. But if they had gone...
Oh yeah, that's the main problem I have. Like, Anakin's sacrifice means nothing. And, like, that is invalidating everything in Star Wars.
I would have forgiven them if they had... I like the idea that she has the spirits of the past Force... Of the past Jedi empowering her.
Show them! Show the ghosts!
I would have loved it if it was Anakin's ghost that tackles Palpatine and drags him.
That would have been great. And then, like, maybe Luke and Anakin's ghosts can, like, share, like, a little nod, and then Anakin can fade away forever.
See, I like the idea. Now, I want to clarify, this isn't me talking about, like, oh, it would have been so much better if I were in charge. Oh, because hindsight's 20/20. I think it would have been really cool if in the backstory for Kylo Ren, like, they had Palpatine, if they expanded on the whole I have been every voice in your head, because he impersonates Vader's voice when Kylo comes on the planet to talk to him. I think it would have been really cool if maybe Palpatine, as Snoke, conjured the image of Vader's ghost, and Kylo thought that Anakin changed his mind after death. So he thinks he's fulfilling his grandfather's legacy. Mm-hmm. There was a scene in I think it was the Star Wars Legacy comics. Like, okay, I think the whole run with, like, Cade and Crate was really stupid, but I really like this one scene where Cade, at least I think it was Cade was, like, where he was feeling that natural pull to the dark side as Skywalkers do. And then he has, like, a Force vision where Vader duels him, like Luke did in the Dagobah cave. And Vader's vision tells him, "Do you want my legacy?" And he, like, takes off the helmet, shows him the burnt face. See where it gets you. Like, if Kylo
That's a cool scene.
Yeah, if Kylo had that moment in Last Jedi, it would have worked really well. And I like the idea that Palpatine, if he's back and pulling the strings from the beginning, if this were the plan from the start, maybe the trilogy could have been about them, like, trying to figure out whether or not Palpatine is back. So then in The Last Jedi, you hear the Emperor laughing after Snoke dies. That would have been cool.
Okay, I said this from episode 7 onward. I don't think we were friends at the time yet. But because I don't think I knew you by then. And I think I did also mention this to you once. I think we actually became friends around the time of, like, Last Jedi.
Yeah, I know I went to see Last Jedi by myself, and we all went to see Rise of Skywalker.
Yeah, the three of us actually went to see Rise of Skywalker together. But I remember, I've said this before, if the big reveal, the big bad behind everything was Jar Jar Binks, I said I would stand up in the theater and I would applaud. And I would have been true to my word had that occurred. If Jar Jar Binks was behind everything, I would have applauded.
I mean, it would have been funny. I don't think it would have worked from a lore standpoint.
I know it wouldn't have worked, but like, that actually might have bumped Rise of Skywalker up a few notches for me. I'm not even gonna lie.
I have been every voice
in your hand!
But anyway, the Wayfinder point. The Wayfinder, you don't have to know how to navigate there with the Wayfinder. The Wayfinder just tells you where it is. Once you know where it is, you can come and go as you please. Kylo made it back no problem without a Wayfinder.
Okay.
But
so, there was a scene in the original draft of this movie in which there was a bit of a somber bit where R2 gets shot, and there's no comedic thing, he just falls over. And there's a bit where Finn's like, we gotta go. It's actually Finn, Chewie, and the droids. And there's this scene where 3PO is just staring at R2's body, and he just calmly says, I'm not leaving him. And then Finn says, look, we gotta go. And then he, more forcefully, I'm not leaving him. And I'm not gonna lie, I'm not going to say that would make the movie better.
I mean, it kind of would.
But I'm like...
I do like that scene. I do think a lot of it was lost on the cutting room floor.
Yeah. But, like, you don't see 3PO in that state. He's just like, yeah. But, so, back to the point. What are you doing, 3PO? I'm taking one final look at my friends. You don't know these people! Not only do you not know these people were instantly trying to sell you out. They're going to destroy your head just because they might find something.
That's true.
Oh, and then there's no sacrifice whatsoever. Oh, I found a way around it. Zoom. And, of course, we're not even going to make it tragic. It's just going to be, I'm bumbling amnesia man until R2 gives me my memory back. Oh, and then them... Oh, yeah, and Rey just casually using Force Lightning. Like, that's just something that she can just do. And thinking she killed Chewie.
Only for him to not be dead, like, 5 seconds
Yeah, it's
later.
literally 5 seconds. It's the next scene. And I'm like, you gotta at least give it room to breathe.
I feel like they should have just not done the Chewie fake out at all.
You think she just should have just killed him?
No, I don't think this should have happened at all. I think that was just shock and awe.
Oh yeah.
Nothing else.
Yeah, it was to add to the runtime.
Okay. Point is though, Palpatine's plan in the end, it makes a fair amount of sense. And I say this within the context that like they didn't have much else they could do, so I'm saying it's better because they dealt with the bad hand they were given. So Palpatine's plan, and I think I explained this in the Mjolnir episode too. Palpatine's plan, they specifically say, now before the Rey stuff, he specifically tells the one admiral who is still loyal to him, the guy who kills Hux.
Yeah.
So he tells him he spells out the plan to him, that the plan, he wants the Resistance to show up so that he can decimate them with his new ships. And I think he says, where the girl goes, they will follow. Because he knows Rey has the Wayfinder. And he knows she's going to lead them there. Because it's the same basic trap he tried in Return of the Jedi.
Yeah.
The Rey shield is fully operational.
So he gives them the specific order to send out a Star Destroyer and send it out as a sacrifice so that the Resistance can take it down, feel confident about just taking it down, and then use that thing's navigational system combined with the beacon they have of Rey emitting a homing signal to them so that she can get the backup she wants. So it tricks them into thinking that it's their idea to go there and defeat him when it's his idea for them to be there and try.
Yep.
As far as the Palpatine resurrection thing, I still think it's a little silly that his body is there. Although I will admit, I said this before, the one thing that has been consistent in nearly all of Star Wars, apart from the Resurrections comic, which puts a hole in a lot of things.
I will admit that technically this is kind of an adaptation of Dark Empire. But I like the Dark Empire stuff a bit more. It makes more sense to me because, like, the fact that his spirit is so much concentrated dark force power that it's like eating up the different clone bodies and he can't maintain it.
That's actually more of my point. There's an unspoken rule in Star Wars: you can't clone a force sensitive. There's consequences. Something is going to be fundamentally wrong with it. Because if you could just clone a force sensitive, you could just make a whole army of force sensitives.
Yeah, that's the entire reason. That's the entire reason that the clone army exists. They were planning on cloning Sifo Dyas, but it failed.
Exactly, but so Sifo Dyas is one. When they tried to clone Galen Merrick, they had to go through a bunch of prototypes because each of them were having like PTSD flashbacks from Galen's life, and it was keeping them from being able to function. And even though the Galen clone we got in the end was still pretty problematic, all things considered, the clone Palpatine had of himself, it was those bodies couldn't handle his force power, so he was destroying them. And Rise of Skywalker. I don't know. I don't think they were consciously doing it, but they follow that rule. Palpatine's body is a corpse. They did it. They cloned him. At least that's what the book tells us, because the movie didn't give us an answer. But they cloned his body, but it can't move. It can't function. It's just a corpse. That's why the claw machine is there, which looks a little silly, but I like the idea. So Palpatine's plan. He wants Rey to show up there and become part of this ritual, which I feel like accidentally tapped into the idea of essence transfer, which was an idea from the Star Wars Expanded Universe. Darth Bane came up with it while he was trying to do his quest to live forever. The idea is that you can detach your soul from your body as you're dying, and it destroys your body, a lot like how Jedi who are becoming one with the Force, their bodies fade out. So Bane's version of essence transfer is your spirit leaves your body, and then a small part of you inhabits the mind of the nearest target. He did it to his apprentice Darth Zana. I think that's what they were going for when they had Palpatine say that I am all the Sith, and they all live in me. So his plan, he wanted Rey to give in to the dark side and strike him down in anger, so that his soul could latch onto her body, and then he could continue ruling through her body. He'd basically take over her mind. He's promising that they're gonna be one mind, one person now, but it's Palpatine. You can't trust anything he says.
Well, obviously I'm going to take over. Like, obviously I'm going to be in complete control.
And Rey denies that because she lets go of the sword and passes it to Kylo Ren, which I will also say I really like the idea the trilogy has of the minds being bridged. Adds a weird metaphysical layer, and it expands a little on Force theology, basically. But he gets angry and lashes out and tries to force himself onto her in that moment. And when they're both there, and the life dyad, okay, it's tacked on, but it's interesting. The fact that he used Force Drain to take their energy because of this weird rare Force dyad. Mm-hmm. And I wish it'd been built on more, but from what we see of it, I respect it. That he was able to fix his body through doing that. And then he tries to kill Kylo and force himself onto her, so then when she is empowered by the power of all the Jedi of the past, that drives him away. Their power is enough to overwhelm him.
It would be better if they physically showed the ghosts.
I'm with you there. I will say, okay, I remember a number of years ago, back when Rise of Skywalker first came out, I had a friend that I'd known for years. I really respected him. He was a couple years younger than me, but Rise of Skywalker was still brand new, still in the theaters at the time. He told me Rise of Skywalker was top 3 Star Wars for him. And that stuck in my head for years.
How?
I know. For years, I was like, why? How did that happen? And now, after this last watch through, where I just watched it with an open mind, just turned my brain off, tried to just
that is the best way to
meet
watch
it on its own merits. I think I finally saw it. The thing that convinced me to put it above The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi. The scene where Rey stabs Kylo and Leia touches him through the Force. I finally think I understand what J.J. Abrams was going for. Kylo, at this point, as far as Leia knows, he's killed her husband, he's killed Luke, he almost killed Chewbacca, he's waging war on the Republic that she sought to restore. She has nothing, no reason to try to love him or feel compassion for him at all. And even Luke, I feel like if Luke had tried to reach out, he wouldn't have bought it, because in his mind, Luke is still the bad guy. Luke is still the guy who was standing over him, sword drawn, when Snoke was still manipulating him. So he still has that hatred of Luke. And yeah, I feel like one thing I will say, I like the fact that he didn't kill Leia in The Last Jedi, and I like the fact that it was left a little ambiguous in The Force Awakens, because we don't see who pushed the button. It very well could have been Han who did it, because he was in his mind, he was coming there to try to bring Ben home, but when he saw how much pain Ben was in, and he knew that Ben was probably ordered to kill him, it would have been really interesting if they revealed Han was the one who ignited the blade to save Kylo the trouble, so that Ben, his son, wouldn't have that on his conscience.
And if that was actually physically stated in the episode, that might have meant something.
I know, but still,
it was not.
The idea, I understand what they were going for in this moment, because in this moment...
I liked the scene between Han and Kylo in Skywalker.
Oh, definitely. That was the first time since 1981 or whatever that Harrison Ford actually tried in a Star Wars film.
Yeah.
And that is sad, really, but we'll get to that later. But still, that moment, it's a parallel to Luke and Vader. Vader came back to the light because in that moment, Luke went through the same trial of temptation that every Sith apprentice of Palpatine went through before. Even Palpatine himself went through when he turned to the dark side. And Luke said, no, I'm not going to succumb to this. He let that rage overtake him. He felt the moment and then put it away and said, this isn't going to define me. And Vader was touched by that because it gave him hope for the first time in his entire life that maybe we're not defined by our mistakes. Kylo had a similar thing in a different light. Leia has, like I said, Leia has no reason to call out to him. In her moment, he can feel that her life is fading. She's on her deathbed.
I think that is why she reached out, though, because she's dying.
This is her. She could have done anything in the whole world with her last moments, and she chose to try to call out to him and make one final plea. And he is genuinely distracted. He stops fighting and just looks up, because he can't believe that Leia actually still loves him at the end of the day. And this is probably the first time he's seen her even before he fell to the dark side.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful, touching moment. I like the way Kylo's arc came in the end. This is why I put Rise of Skywalker above the other two. I think it's probably worse than the other two, but because it was having to deal with the bad that came from the other two, it came out not as terrible as it could have been.
And that's a fair point.
When I saw that in the scene the other night when I watched it, that was the moment I talked about earlier. I was like, I understand you, movie! It's not my top 3, but I understand why it is for someone else.
Oh, remember when we went, there was these two younger girls, and they said this is the first Star Wars movie that they'd ever seen ever.
I don't remember this, but...
And I'm like, wow, you picked a hell of a time to get into Star Wars. Wow, that is...
Oh, you poor unfortunate soul.
You poor unfortunate soul. Like, I can only imagine, like, you jump in on movie 9. You jump in on movie 9. Alright, I guess we're gonna go, my number 9, as a matter of fact.
What was yours again?
Solo.
Oh, right.
I have less to say, actually. And the reason because, Solo is just a really big nothing burger for me. Like, Solo is a movie that exists, and that is kind of why it is so low on my list. It's a story that didn't really need to be told, and it's not told in a particularly enjoyable way, and, like, I guess it's cool to see Maul again after episode 1 in live action. I mean, I loved what they did with him in Clone Wars. I mean, that's the only real thing I remember from this movie, is that, oh, hey, guess what? Maul is the one responsible for Han's girlfriend's criminal career, I guess. And then there is the one particularly annoying droid that hangs out with Lando and then becomes one with the Falcon. And then the movie just kinda ends. Oh, you're not with a boarding party, so you're Han Solo.
Yeah, I'm not gonna defend that. That was stupid.
That was awful. That was awful. I debated putting this on lower just because of that line.
I think it would have been funny. I think the memes were going around when this film first came out as Han alone. Which makes about as much sense.
Yeah, no, so that's really my piece on Solo. I really don't have much to say because I think it is just a big nothing burger of a movie.
Alright. This kid just keeps working out really well with our rankings. My next one is also Solo.
Alright,
that's my, number 8 we're on? Yeah, number 8.
Alright, number 8. And my number 8, Force Awakens.
Nice. Okay, I think Solo is a movie. I think the story behind the development of Solo is more interesting than Solo itself. So, originally, it was supposed to be directed by Lloyd and Miller, the team that created...
Oh, yeah, I knew that.
Yeah, the team that gave us the Spider-Verse, Clone High, the Lego Movie. But there was stuff behind the scenes. Apparently, they were taking it in a really really weird direction, to the point that the actors who were in Solo, they personally went up to Kathleen Kennedy and were like, please make them stop. This makes me uncomfortable. Which,
Yeah.
is a problem. I feel like, it then went to Ron Howard. I can kind of feel, watching the movie, where the parts that Lord and Miller were in charge of and the parts that Ron Howard were in charge of. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I feel like Solo is almost passable. Okay, that's a bad way to say it. I think Solo is an okay film. I think Solo, if it were a flagship miniseries on Disney Plus instead of a theatrical release, it would be given a lot more credit. Because Solo had the trouble of, like, how do you flesh out the backstory of Han Solo? It's sort of the same thing they had the problem with trying to flesh out Anakin in the prequels. Han Solo has to be like a sketchy guy, but also not a bad enough person that he can't be convinced to go do the right thing by hanging out with Luke for like a couple days.
Yeah, and the other thing I thought of, the main character of Solo, I forget the actor, but he's too nice to be Han Solo. At least
That's
early
fair.
Han Solo. I'm like, he's too much of a generic hero type. I'm like, I don't believe that this guy is a devious scoundrel getting into gambling debts. I believe Harrison Ford is.
Okay, keep in mind, Solo was supposed to be a trilogy. The end of the first movie really feels like this is like Han starting to turn into the guy. I think if we had 2 and 3, where we saw his slow dissension into becoming the guy, a lot more people would be okay with it.
I guess I can see your point.
Yeah, I guess that's my greater point, is that Solo is another example of missed potential. If it hadn't bombed in the box office like it did, they might have been given a chance to show what they could really do.
Oh yeah, that was the first, like, real failure on the books for Star Wars. Which basically is the reason, well, at least the start of the end for its decline, unfortunately. Alright, we've already said our piece about the sequel trilogy, so I'm not going to bore you with unnecessary details on my opinions on...
Well, if you had any thoughts about my analysis of
Oh,
it...
no,
so
honestly, I found your analysis very interesting, and I think it is part of my bias of just, like, at the time, I didn't think it was that bad. There are scenes in it that I enjoy, but I realize that, it's just scenes that I enjoyed from the original trilogy that kind of were, like, watered down. I will admit, I was still in my Marvel phase, so the 1 or 2 Marvel-esque jokes in it did not bother me as much. I know that the little torch thing, or BB-8, people are saying that it's, BB-8 giving Finn a thumbs up. No, my headcanon, he's flipping him off. Like, it's absolutely... like, that's how I choose to interpret that scene, and, like, that
I mean, that is very funny.
He's
Both make sense.
Yeah, no, he's not giving him a thumbs up, he's flipping him off.
I will say a big problem I have with Force Awakens also has to do with the framing of it. And this will go a bit more into my next pick after this, when we're done talking about these films, but...
Just real quick, though. The scene where Finn fights back against Kylo Ren after he screams traitor genuinely is
a good scene.
Well, I'm with you there.
Like, that is a good scene. It is him fight. Like, remember, that's the thing that made me angry with the thing that was in the book. I'm like, really? He wasn't a hero in this moment. He wasn't a hero standing up against his former boss, knowing that what he does is wrong. This moment, he's not a hero. He's only a hero when he tries to sacrifice himself to save Rose. Then he's a hero. I'm like, no. No. No, 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 no. That is absolutely incorrect.
You're right. You're right.
Also, I love how they mentioned this in The Last Jedi, that somehow Kylo gets beaten by somebody with zero training. Yes, I know he was injured. But, like, no, that doesn't matter. It should have been like he fights to a stalemate. The breaking Earth could break them up still, and he just decides it's not worth it, and he leaves.
I'm with you there. You know, Mark Hamill, I remember one of the interviews with him from early on. He was talking about how, like, when he first read the script of Force Awakens, his first cold thoughts, like when he read the thing about the opening crawl, Luke Skywalker has vanished, he's like, oh, that's an interesting point. Okay, that's cool. I wonder where I am at this point. He thought that when that saber flies through the snow and is caught by someone behind Kylo, he thought that was going to be his big reveal, his big return. Like, there I am, standing in the snow, it's triumphant, and the camera pans. Huh?
Oh, that's not me. That's not me at all. But she is going to take my name in the last movie.
Yeah.
Unceremoniously. Given the entire point of the movie is that names don't matter, and yet you think the name matters because you're a Skywalker now? The entire point of the movie is that names don't matter, so own that you're a Palpatine.
Yup. I would have loved if they had the trilogy be about Finn and Rey both learning to become Jedi together. Because we've never seen two Jedi protagonists.
Yes, that would have been great!
Finn, former stormtrooper who worked for the bad guy, now rises up as the bad guy's equal. And Rey... I'm actually going to say it. I like the idea of Rey being revealed to be a Palpatine. It just had no build-up. It was just shoehorned in last second. If that had been the plan from the beginning, it would have been really cool. If she had been, like... If they had been growing together, maybe that could have worked into the story of, like, why she's afraid to leave the planet is because maybe she knows she has some kind of relationship. Like, she knows she had a relative who is an Imperial officer or something. And then she finds out. Yeah. And then she would find out later that, oh, it wasn't just somebody who worked for the Empire, it was the Empire itself, the Emperor. And that would have been interesting. And I know that would have just filled in the gap. That would have just been copying the I am your father reveal.
Yeah.
But I don't know. And the framing device is more what really annoys me. Force Awakens doesn't have a central character that it's focusing on.
No, it really doesn't. It's jumbled all over the place.
A New Hope, Lucas said when he wrote that, the intention is it's Leia's story. Tarkin is the main antagonist. The conflict is between him and her. The side character is Luke and Vader. They are being built up to become the focus of the later movies, and we are seeing all of this through the perspective of the two droid characters. He did the same thing with Phantom Menace. The main threat is Viceroy, and it wasn't done very well, but the main character of the story is supposed to be Padme, and we're seeing it through the perspective of the two Jedi, and it's building up Anakin as a side character who becomes important in the next movie.
Yeah.
And Force Awakens just doesn't have that. It's just it doesn't really understand who the main character is, who the main threat is, because we have like 3 main characters and we have 3 bad guys, and none of them have the central focus on who's the most important.
And as much as I hate the Marvelisms that happened later, I will admit, as much as it doesn't take Kylo Ren seriously as a threat, I liked the scene of his little temper tantrum and the 2 stormtroopers are like, I don't want any part of this, and then they turn around. I'm like, I will admit, that got a hearty chuckle from me out of the theater. I'm like, okay, that's actually genuinely funny.
Crap, I just realized we're 2 hours in and we have, 7 films to talk about still.
Okay, we're gonna...
This will be the longest episode and I have a week to make it.
Oh, lovely. Hopefully we're just going to cut out awkward pauses, and then we're just going to post as is, mostly. All right, so let's go on to our next thing.
Yeah, my number 7 is The Phantom Menace.
Attack of the Clones.
Ooh, okay. All
right, you go first.
All right, Phantom Menace. Boy, I'm going to say something similar to what I said with The Force Awakens, The Force Awakens has the problem that it set the tone and made everything else was just saddled with how bad it was. Phantom Menace has a similar problem. I don't know. It's hard because Phantom Menace, I've come to realize, is a film. It was created with the intention, the focus of the film is revealed in hindsight after you've seen the other two films. In the first film, Palpatine is just the benevolent guy in the background. It's the same actor. An eagle-eyed fan would spot that. But if you didn't know that connection, you wouldn't guess that he's the main villain. Actually, that's a twist that they build into Episode 2. It's an Empire Strikes Back moment.
I mean, there is the shot at the very end of the film where it's, like, very obvious that it's him, but, like...
Yes and no. Actually, this is a fun story. I have a friend who's an attorney. She listens to our show. She has comments. She's mostly a Marvel fan and a Star Trek fan. But she had only ever seen A New Hope and The Last Jedi, and that was all the Star Wars she had consumed.
A New Hope and The Last Jedi.
Yup. Everything else...
Wow, that is an eclectic combination of films.
Uh-huh. Everything else was cultural osmosis.
I'm sorry, I'm wrapping my head around that still. Continue.
So, last year, she and I started watching through Star Trek together. She was trying to expose me to more Star Trek content, and she and I watched through the prequels together. You know, she wanted to know more about Star Wars too. So we watched The Phantom Menace together. She didn't recognize the Palpatine thing until the second movie. I asked her thoughts, and she was like, "Am I supposed to know that Palpatine is the Sith Lord yet?" Now I've had more time with the actor. I know what he looks like. I know what he sounds like. So now seeing him under the hood, it makes sense. But like the idea behind Phantom Menace, it's constructed in a very particular way so that you think the main point that you're supposed to be worried about is this, this Naboo trade crisis. But the real story is what's happening in the background, and you don't realize it until after the third movie. Because then you see how Palpatine used this to elevate himself, get the role of Chancellor, and then he started the war and got all the Jedi killed. So, in essence, part of the reason Phantom Menace chose to spend so much time showing the Senate and talking about the trade routes and everything else that everyone complains about, the reason they did that is because it's intentionally trying to be a smokescreen. It's leading from A to B and keeping things hidden in the background so you don't know what's actually important until later. The problem is that people watching that without the context of the first two don't have that information. So they're just seeing this really boring movie that feels like a weird B+ Star Trek episode. And I feel like Phantom Menace has the worst writing and acting of all three films in the prequels.
You know what? That's fair. I see your point.
My attorney friend, her cold reaction after seeing the film, her first thought, like halfway through, we streamed it on Discord together, like when the stuff with Anakin came up, she was like, "Are you an angel?" Her comment, she mentioned to me in the Discord chat, she was just like, "Well, to be fair, he's probably the best actor out of anybody I've seen so far."
Wow.
Yeah, I don't know. She just had problems with the bad acting from the adult actors.
Really?
Uh-huh.
I actually think that Liam Neeson's performance was actually not bad.
Oh, I agree with you completely.
Ewan McGregor was good too, actually.
Yeah. Well, like I said when we were talking about the general thoughts, is Ewan McGregor shines in this film. Liam Neeson does too. But I feel like this has the weakest. Going back to my attorney friend, when we watched it together, the first thing she said to me after we finished the movie, she was like, "Man, I've taken actual film school classes. This movie is making mistakes that they tell you not to do on day one of film school." Like the example she used to me when she was talking about it, like the scene when they're on Naboo and they're planning the battle against the Trade Federation. Mm-hmm. They were doing a really good job at building up the tension of the scene and having the characters worry about it. And then they basically just turned to the camera and was like, "Wow, this is a really bad moment, guys." It's little things like that. Mistakes.
Yeah.
Bad writing. Bad screenwriting. And never getting that second take.
That's a fair point. And actually, that's kind of the reason that my number, whatever we're on, is Attack of the Clones.
The Anakin and Padme stuff.
I honestly think that the romance is the center of everything. It is the center of Anakin's character arc. It is the center of everything, and the acting is not selling that at all. The best part is you can go and like see it in Clone Wars. You can see both versions in both like the George Tarkovsky. What's his name?
I know who you're talking. Tartakovsky. I think?
George Tartakovsky.
Gendy Tartakovsky.
Gendy Tartakovsky. The 2D Clone Wars.
He made Samurai Jack. And a couple other shows
Primal.
like that.
Yeah, but he did one that's explored better in there. The 3D Clone Wars, of course, it's explored better in there. But that's supplemental material.
Right.
But, like, yes, his love for Padme is the crux of his entire being, really. Like, that needs to be solid, and it really isn't, given the acting in, the dialogue. Like, I don't feel as though these people are in love. They're in love because the story says they're in love, but, like, it doesn't really convey that.
That's fair.
And, yes, of course, the infamous, the sand, it's coarse, rough, irritating, and it gets everywhere. It's not soft. And I'm like, oh, God, you little creeper. You can...
Yeah.
I'm like, bro. And the reason, again, that I don't like Attack of the Clones, I think the writing is actually worse than Phantom Menace, is because, okay, the Phantom Menace, say what you will, there's a through line. Like, there is a logical through line through the whole thing. Yep. There's a lot of asides and tangents, much like our conversations, in Attack of the Clones. Like, it's fun when you're in it, but we're not in it. We're viewing it. So then it's like, there's so many tangents and side things, and then 3PO's head gets put on a battle droid body, and then there's a weird, like, little comedy thing, like, happening in the background. And then, oh, hey, there's Boba Fett's dad. Oh, I guess Jango's dead because, Sam Jackson killed him. I guess, he's not going to be a character. Also, like, I'm pretty sure when he picks up the helmet at the end of Little Boba, the head should be tumbling out, but whatever.
Actually, if you look in the background, the shadow of Jango's head flies out in the scene where Windu decapitates him.
Okay.
If you look at the background, the helmet flies off and the silhouette of the head falls out of the helmet as it flies away.
Okay. Alright, yeah, basically my problem is, like, I don't think the writing is as strong. Actually, I argue that the writing, at least the through line, is better in Phantom Menace.
What kind of side tangents are you talking about, then?
Oh, I don't know, just, like, Jango Fett subcontracting it to a different person, and then that subcontractor has a subcontractor, and then you find out, oh, okay, we gotta go to Geonosis, or we gotta go to Camino, and then, oh, hey, the droid people are at Geonosis, so we gotta go there, and then... It's just like side tangent after side tangent after side tangent. And it's cool to see Dooku fight Yoda. And it's cool to see him cut off Anakin's hand. But, my main problem is, like, the romance, which should be the crux of Anakin's character. And, like, the acting is just not conveying that.
With my other rankings, my ranking was, like, one above yours. So I was able to segue right into it. There's a couple films between Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones for me. I'm afraid I'm going to forget what I want to say.
Oh, okay. So we're moving on to the next, to our number 6, is it?
No, I just want to address the point you were talking about with the... Okay, people make fun of that. I know it's really funny when you say it, of like, Palpatine wants the Senator dead, so he told his apprentice Dooku to go kill Senator Amidala. And so Dooku went and hired a bounty hunter and said, go kill Senator Amidala. And Jango went and found a subcontractor, the shapeshifter changeling. I know her name. I read the Boba Fett books about when... Zam Wessel!
Zam
yes,
Wessel.
Thank you.
Oh, yes, because she's not a changeling. Claudette.
He calls her a changeling in the movie, but you're right, that is the species name.
And then she subcontracts it again to, like, centipedes.
In all fairness... That's not what's going on. So, the centipede thing is like George using another old school trope in spy movies. Because this one is supposed to be a bit more of a spy thriller. And
I don't really get that vibe.
There's a lot of old school spy stories where, like, they'll try to kill someone by sending a venomous creature into the room.
I mean, I get that part of it, but like in terms of overall, I'm not really seeing
Here's the overall, though. Palpatine doesn't want Padme dead, because Palpatine knows that Anakin is sweet on her. Palpatine wants Anakin and Padme to have a situation where they're a thing. And Newt Gunray is in the background, they're trying to get him to have the Trade Federation back the Separatists. And Newt Gunray is like, oh, that teenage Naboo monarch, Senator Amidala, she humiliated me all these years ago, and I want her dead. You should do something about it, or I won't sign on to this. So Palpatine works this into his plan. He tells Dooku, like, okay, you erased the... And this is me going off into, like, lore, too, not really explained in the film, which is, I think, where the holdup is happening with people.
Yeah, that's probably the holdup.
So Dooku already erased the records of Geonosis, which we know because it's in the film. If it's not in our archives, it's not complete. Dooku did it because he's the one who contracted to make the clones. It was all part of Palpatine's plan.
I thought that was Sifo-Dyas.
In the lore,
Oh yeah, I know they were
Dooku,
working together.
Diaz, and Qui-Gon were all in on it.
Oh, Qui-Gon was in on it.
Well, it depends on what source you look at. But anyway, so
that is new information to me. I did not know that.
So the idea is they need the Jedi to have a reason to go to Kamino and see the clone facility. How can they get there if nobody? So the solution: send the guy who's responsible for the clone army, who we know has Kamino tech on him. Contract him to make a fake assassination attempt on Padme's life. And that creates the problem of...
So, my question is, did Zam Wessel know that it was a fake assassination, or did he just hire her because she's terrible at her job?
That's a good question, actually. I think she was in on it, because I read the Boba Fett books when I was a kid. Like I said, there was a Scholastic book series about Child Boba and his journey. And he had an interesting story in the background. Like, it talks about, in the book, how he likes Zam Wessel. Zam and Jango had been partners on things. Jango raised Boba with the belief that he tried to instill in his clone son, there are no friends, there are no enemies. There are only allies and people who are antagonistic. Mm-hmm. So, other tangent aside. So, the plan was Jango makes an assassination attempt on Padme, so then when she's freaking out, kind old Palpatine can be like, sounds like you need some Jedi to protect you. I know. How about those guys that went on that adventure with you all those years ago? So now Obi-Wan is on the case investigating and looking into it while Anakin is stationed...
And Death Sticks guy gets a happy ending, as I told you in the Mjolnir episode.
Yup. But anyway, so Anakin is now getting cozy with Padme and being star-crossed lovers, being rebellious, being people who like to do things that they're told not to do, fall head over heels and are too focused on just how good they feel in the moment to really think about the long term. Not to say they don't have chemistry otherwise. I'm with you, it was not conveyed well on screen. But this was all part of Palpatine's plan to orchestrate this whole string of events to send Obi-Wan in a place where he would be able to find the clone army and report it to the Jedi just in time for the Clone Wars to start. And then Jango leads him to Geonosis.
I understand the 4D chess, but, if you really think about it, Palpatine, there's a lot of variables that could have gone horribly wrong.
That's a big thing in all of Palpatine's plans, though. Return of the Jedi just so happened to be the one time when the variables went out of his favor.
Yeah. Alright, so, now that that's aside, are we going to move on to our number, 5 or 6?
My number 6 is Rogue One.
Phantom Menace. Rogue One's this low, huh? Okay.
It's not because I think Rogue One is a bad movie. I just think the highs of the 5 above it are higher than Rogue One.
Okay, I see that.
See, I'm gonna be honest. I've come to realize from this last watch through I did, I don't think there's any Star Wars film in the 11 that we're talking about that are objectively awful movies. There are bad parts in all of them. Mm-hmm. There are things that are objectively better than other things, but even though I put the sequel trilogy all in the bottom of the list, I wouldn't put any of them in F tier. C and D are where I put them.
Okay.
But Rogue One is a solid B for me. It just so happens that the other 5 are A and S.
Okay, I can see you.
That's where Rogue One, I have a lot of things I like about it. I also have a lot of things that I wish were a little stronger.
I have those as well.
I wish that I could remember the characters. That's one of the things. With the other 2 trilogies, actually the 3 trilogies, even the bad characters, I remember them. Newt Gunray terribly acted in the movie. but I remember Newt Gunray because he's Newt Gunray.
Mm-hmm.
Even the sequel trilogy, I remember the names of these characters that I don't like. Apart from Jin, Cassian, and I think I randomly remember the name Chirrut Emwe. That's the name of the blind guy. Mm-hmm. Apart from them and the droid, I don't remember the names of anybody in this movie.
Yeah, and that's a fair criticism. And on to mine. We already talked about Phantom Menace, but basically, I do think, like I said, that I actually brought that up in my Attack of the Clones thing, that I do think that the through line is much stronger in Phantom Menace than it is in Attack of the Clones. And I will admit there are great scenes in it. The pod racing scene, actually genuinely okay. I think it was pretty good. The phenomenal fight scene between them and Darth Maul. Even the bit where, like, the laser wall separates them. There's just a tiny bit of character in all of them. Maul pacing back and forth like he's like an animal in a cage going at, like, he's like, I'm gonna get you, I'm gonna get you. And Qui-Gon just calmly meditating while Obi-Wan is just anxious and ready to get in. Like, there's just, like, so many tiny bits of character throughout that are just really great. And of course, Maul becomes an amazing character in the Clone Wars, although I'm trying not to let that dictate my ranking.
Right.
But that with the John Williams score, Duel of the Fates, like I said at the beginning of this, probably the best composition in the series. And that is probably why I rank it a little more than Attack of the Clones.
That's fair. I feel like, I feel like...
Sorry, the other reason.
Go ahead.
Weird Al Yankovic's American Pie parody called The Saga Begins. I actually had that song before I watched episode 1, so I knew the entire plot of episode 1 because of the Weird Al Yankovic song.
So
this here Anakin guy. Maybe Vader someday later, now he's just a small fry. He left his home and kissed his mama goodbye, saying soon I'm gonna be a Jedi. Soon I'm gonna be a Jedi.
But anyway, I'm gonna be honest. I feel like Attack of the Clones was like 2 rewrites away from being a really, really good movie. Phantom Menace needed like 3 or 4. That's part of the reason. Like,
I get it.
I understand fundamentally the reason all the choices were made. I just feel like they weren't done as strongly. Like, even the pod racing scene, I understand why it's there. I like the cinematography of the pod racing scene. I think it's too long. It should have been cut down a bit.
And that's a fair point. That is a fair assessment.
Mm-hmm. And objectively, I think the Duel of the Fates is a lot better a fight scene than the Attack of the Clones fight.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just much more personal. And the choreography is really good. Alright, we gotta move on to 5. Or do you have any further opinions?
I'm trying to think. My mind wandered a bit. Phantom Menace. No, I think I'm good for now.
Alright,
I know I didn't talk much about Rogue One, but, it's an okay film.
And I'll make up for it.
Okay,
in the next issue.
Okay. So. Number 5? Mine is Attack of the Clones.
Rogue One.
Alrighty. Well, I was talking about it. I feel like it's stronger than Phantom Menace. Phantom Menace had the problem that it was trying to hide the fact about what it was really about. Attack of the Clones, that's a much smaller problem because we're finally getting the meat and potatoes of the character driven. Now, it's not executed very well, but I also don't think everything in Phantom Menace was executed as well as it could have been. So it's like, just which one do I prefer? It's like, which one is the lesser of 2 evils, almost.
I can get that mindset. That's not terrible.
I was talking at the start when we were talking about our thoughts on the general trilogy about how I feel like if the actors had understood better, like, I feel like that really shows in, like, Hayden Christensen and Natalie Portman. They are really great actors, both of them. When they're just allowed to just stop talking and act with their face, their natural chemistry and their ability to feel the emotion of the character works really, really well.
And that's definitely going to be a point that I will make in a film that I have ranked much higher, which we will get to. Mm-hmm. Oh, I wonder which film it is. Yeah, I mean, I've already talked about 2 of them so far. I wonder which film I'm possibly talking about.
Uh-huh. But, I have a criticism of this film. It is the criminal underutilization of Count Dooku. Like, you have Sir Christopher Lee right there. I it is not really a big reveal for him to pop in at the end and be like, aha, it's me, I'm the one in charge, because we mentioned him once at the beginning of the film, and then it does nothing, and then he shows up and is like, aha, it's me, and then like, oh, it's him.
Like, yeah, I see your point. You could have used him more.
Obi-Wan didn't even have much of a reaction when when Dooku used Force lightning. Like, if this is the first time any Jedi is seeing real Force lightning in practice in like 1,000 years, that should be a bigger deal.
Yeah, I never really thought about that, but yeah. And I actually enjoy the fight scene between Yoda. Oh, there's actually a funny little behind-the-scenes tidbit that I know about. So Christopher Lee played Dracula in the Hammer horror films. So, and he tried to distance himself from that years later. So when they needed a stand-in for Yoda, they made like a little Yoda ceramic thing to, show where Yoda's going to stand in the scene. And as a joke, George Lucas put vampire fangs on the Yoda puppet. And there's an actual video of like Christopher Lee's reaction to it, and he says, "I didn't think you'd do this to me, George. I really didn't."
That's sweet. I love that.
Yeah.
All the more reason he should have been in more of the movie.
Yeah, no, he absolutely should have been more. I don't know if his health was in decline at that point.
I don't think so.
The dude is a legend. Christopher Lee became a heavy metal star in like his late 80s. Like the dude.
You're right.
And his songs are amazing. Listen to them if you can find them. So would you like me to talk about Rogue One now?
I'm trying to think if there was anything else I had about Attack of the Clones. I mean, I could spend a while talking about Count Dooku, but I plan to address him in a future video and talk about like sort of the wasted potential, both in Attack of the Clones and the Clone Wars. But that's a whole other side tangent. I'll address it another day.
Alright, like I said, my pick for this section is Rogue One, and the reason I enjoy this movie so much is obviously this one scene that I will get to later. And that is probably the reason that it cemented it where it is, but like I will get to it when I get to it. I will not be the first person to say this, but Rogue One is the first Star Wars film that felt like a war. Like, it showed you boots on the ground, what it's like for the civilians of this world, and just, like, how the Empire is affecting it. And I guess it's kind of a plot hole that everybody was like, oh yeah, it's a tiny reactor thing. How did, they get this possible huge flaw that could easily be blown up? Okay, so it's revealed, yes, this was an intentional flaw because somebody didn't actually enjoy the cause that the Empire was fighting for, so he made a tiny thing. Nothing that would be noticed, but he's like, well, there's space wizards, so, like, if a space wizard happens to show up, they could probably do this. I mean, it's rare because, like, I'm pretty sure the government killed them all. But
I think anyone could have done it. It's just that Luke was the one who made the shot. He made it with the hopes that anyone
the Force kind of propelled it, so.
Well, certainly. I will say
It is an exhaust port, so it pushes things out. So.
One of the issues I do have, and it's very minor, Rogue One almost makes the opening of A New Hope weird. Because, like, Vader gets onto the ship, and he starts killing rebels.
Oh, that is the best scene in the film.
Oh, I agree with you.
He punches a laser through a dude's chest. It is the coolest thing on film.
No, but let me finish my point, though. So, Leia's ship is right there in the middle of the fight, and then they fly away. Vader watches her ship get away, and then they chase down her ship. They invade her ship. She walks up to Vader and is just like, we were on a diplomatic mission.
I argue that makes it funnier.
I mean, it does.
He's like, I know darn well that's not what happened. Just like, do not talk to me in that tone of voice, young lady. I will get your mother on the phone. Oh, wait, no, I can't. Right. Oh, yeah, that's... And he just looks at his robot parts. Right, yeah. It's just...
There was a meme I saw on a Star Wars thing years ago. Like, it was a thing of Vader acting like a real dad in that scene. Like him holding up a picture of Leia in the bikini from the 6th one. I don't approve of you going around gallivanting yourself like that. Well, let's ask Mom what she thinks. Oh, wait, I can't. Go to your room. My room was on Alderaan. Sith happens.
Sith happens.
Look, Daddy has very complicated things at his work, Leia. Wait a minute. I just thought about that. Does he know about Leia? I know he might know about Luke, but I don't... no, he doesn't yet. I mean, if you take the Disney Marvel comics after the Disney buyout, he learns at some point between episodes 4 and 5, I think Yoda, Boba Fett gives him the information, and he realizes, I have a son.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I had a thing that I was going to talk about, but the thing that I was going to talk about is something our fans do not like, and I've noticed when I bring it up in videos, people, like, scroll away and move on to something else, so I'm not going to talk about it here, but there is an alternate venue that explores that and makes it really interesting to me. But, for the purposes of this video, let me put that like this. Vader, his reaction in Empire Strikes Back, he is already saying, where is Skywalker? Bring me Skywalker. And then in the scene where Palpatine says, I have no doubt that this boy is the offspring of Anakin Skywalker, Vader has no reaction. He just dryly asks, how can this be? And with the context of the greater Star Wars lore, that implies Vader figured it out between 4 and 5, and he knows Palpatine lied to him about
But he's playing coy.
Uh-huh. So I feel like that's not so much of a plot hole.
I don't think it is a plot hole at all.
Right.
I already inferred that he figured it out between the two films. But, Rogue One is... I actually like it. It's like a heist movie.
I like it, too.
It's a heist movie. It's like a boots-on-the-ground war movie. The characters are maybe not memorable, but colorful. The droid is my favorite character by far. Like, every line of his is like... he nails it every single time. I'm with you. Cassian said I had to. Like, it's not Marvel humor, but it works. Actually, the bit where he's pretending to still be an Imperial droid, and he slaps Cassian, there's a bit, like, during that scene, you can see that Cassian kind of covers his face with his arm. It's because Cassian's actor was laughing, because that wasn't in the script. The guy who plays the droid just ad-libbed that slap in the moment.
Nice.
And he was covering his face so he didn't laugh on camera. Alright, shall we move on? I've actually said my piece. Obviously, It's the best Darth Vader season. It's the best live-action Darth Vader shot ever. So that's the reason it's ranked as high.
I'm going to be honest. I feel like it is really good. I feel like it was kind of topped by Vader's entrance in Kenobi, the Disney Plus show. When he comes down onto the planet and starts killing people walking towards Kenobi's spot, it was really cool.
Yeah, but okay, I have my problems with Kenobi because it breaks the lore. And
only a little bit. But that's a discussion for another day.
Another time.
Number 4, I think we're on now?
Yeah, we're on 4.
Okay. So, my number 4, Revenge of the Sith.
That's my number 4!
Nice!
Alright, we're in agreement.
Wonderful!
Okay, Revenge of the Sith. You go first.
Okay. Revenge of the Sith. People who are more familiar with my older content on my channel know I listed Revenge of the Sith as my favorite Star Wars film way back in the day when I did the Star Wars questionnaire. By the way, Nick, if you'd like to do the Star Wars questionnaire in a future podcast, I'm more than happy to arrange that.
All right, we'll see how that works.
But the more recent rewatches, time has not been kind to Revenge of the Sith.
And that's part of the reason why it's where it is on my list, too. It has its problems.
I feel like everything from, like, the opening crawl with the fight, with a battle over Coruscant, with them flying through the ships, and them all the way up to them landing on Coruscant and Anakin and Obi-Wan saying their goodbyes. Everything about that is, like, really good. It's a little hokey in places. It's got a couple issues, but everything about that, it's like a really good sci-fi, science fantasy drama. It's really, really good.
Oh, the negotiator!
Okay, except for that. That's another one of my problems. But it's like as soon as Anakin and Padme are on screen together, it's, oh yeah, this was the relationship. We're back into Attack of the Clones territory.
I actually think that his facial expressions of Padme revealing that she's pregnant
I'm with
really
you too.
good.
It's the dialogue that does it and the way they deliver the lines. I said this. When Natalie Portman and Hayden Christensen are allowed to just act with their faces, it's gorgeous, it's beautiful, it works with the characters, you believe it. But then, we're still with this dialogue that needed a rewrite or two. Okay.
Okay, so my problem is, and I said I wouldn't bring in the supplemental material.
Uh-huh.
Dooku is terrifying in the 2D Clone Wars show,
Yeah.
by the Samurai Jack guy, and then they just kind of make him a joke in the actual film, and arguably in the 3D Clone Wars as well.
I'm with you there. I will say I love the scene where he's executed. I think it is surprising that he is killed in the beginning, and I think it works as a way to subvert the expectations.
Oh, did I say Dooku?
Yes.
Oh. I thought... Okay, sorry,
You're talking about Grievous,
I'm
aren't
stupid.
you?
I'm stupid.
Yes.
Sorry.
Okay.
Grievous.
I agree with you completely.
I'm sorry. Grievous is terrifying. Actually, no. No. Dooku's actually really well done in the 2D as well. Yeah, that applies.
I'm with you.
That applies. So yeah, no. Dooku. Sorry. Freaking Grievous. Grievous is terrifying in the 2D cartoon. He is like actually scary. He's like some slasher villain, and he killed Shaggy. No, I love that. I love that they literally just...
Because it was on
Shaggy
Cartoon Network, they made a character who looked like Shaggy and then just named him Shaggy, spelled SHA apostrophe GI.
Shaggy.
Uh-huh.
And they just straight up had him kill him. Oh, like...
He doesn't even, like, kill him, like, with the lightsaber or anything.
No, he just crushes him to death by jumping on him. And, yeah, again, Grievous is genuinely terrifying in that.
Lucas said in behind-the-scenes stuff, he didn't want him to be too much like Vader, and he still wanted the threat to be Palpatine in the background, because this is the first time since Episode 6 that Palpatine has been allowed to shine as the true villain of the story. So in his mind, when he was making Grievous, he wanted Grievous to embody some traits of Vader, because all three villains in the prequels embody some traits of Vader.
Mm-hmm.
Darth Maul represents, like, the young, power-hungry Dark Lord who just really hates the Jedi. Dooku is a fallen Jedi who made some bad decisions to pledge to what he thought was the ultimate greater good. Grievous is a broken cyborg who regrets his life choices. And
what species was he again?
Kaleesh.
A Kaleesh.
I know that. I remember that is engraved in my brain permanently, because my sister, as a little girl, with no Star Wars knowledge outside of the films whatsoever, had an imaginary best friend named Kaleesh. So when I read that in the lore, I was like, "Wah! There she is! She's an alien race now!"
Oh my god, your sister was visited by aliens the entire time!
I don't think she listens to my podcast, so I don't think there's a chance she's gonna care if I bring this up. But anyway, George Lucas wanted Grievous to be like a mustache-twirling villain who is scheming, putting the girls on the train tracks and running away at the first trouble. I don't mind that being the thing. The problem is that the other people who made the stuff when he hired them to do other Clone Wars material made it so much cooler.
Yeah, they made him a terrifying, remorseless killer who barely spoke.
And even beyond that, his backstory in the Legends canon is so cool and so interesting. By the way, I'm curious, did you see any of the Lego Star Wars things that went on Disney+?
I think I saw the holiday special, because they made fun of Palpatine living in Rise of Skywalker, and they actually had Kylo Ren turn to the camera and say, "Because you died when the Death Star blew up. Because you can't possibly survive something like that."
Well, they had the Halloween special like a year later, Star Wars Terrifying Tales, and they have like this old custodian who's collecting old relics, and he's telling these stories which may or may not be true. One of them has a duel between Darth Maul and General Grievous, and he actually uses General Grievous's name from the expanded lore when he's explaining the context of who Grievous is to the sequel trilogy characters. So that is, I saw that, I was like, excuse me?
They used his actual name?
Yeah! Which I'm not going to try to pronounce off the top of my head.
Because it's like a weird alien name, I know. But yeah, I liked Anakin's fall to the dark side. I liked that meme where it's Obi-Wan and Yoda looking at all the dead younglings, and then they just put caramel dancing over it like it was a hard rager, and they had flashing lights.
I like that.
Like, it's a stupid meme, but I thought it was funny. And yes, of course, what do we do, Master Skywalker? Yes, no, obviously it was the point of no return, and it's dark, and and obviously, with the supplemental material, Order 66 is genuinely tragic now.
Yeah, and I'll also say, Anakin, as much as George isn't able to communicate what he wants to the actors, he is really good at explaining his thought process to the people who are doing the visuals. Like, the whole, like, I'm not the first person to point this out, but Anakin's whole turn to the dark side is visualized in the background by the sun. All the shots with him contemplating it before this, him hanging out with Obi-Wan and talking to the Jedi, they're all in the broad daylight with the light shining through. When he's sitting in the Jedi Council room by himself, and he's contemplating whether or not he wants to go stop the arrest of Chancellor Palpatine, the sun is setting in the background, and then when he goes and attacks the Jedi Order, it's completely nighttime.
Yeah, that's like a bunch of visual symbolism that is just really good.
And I really like the story George came up with for how Anakin fell in the first place. I like the poetry bookend. I remember when I made my video making fun of Ben Shapiro's bad Star Wars takes, and he was talking about how, like, it's so weird that Vader becomes part of the Empire, because if Palpatine made a promise to him, and then Palpatine broke the promise because Padme died, why is he still there? I think it's explained perfectly well within the film if you just use your brain. The thing that broke Vader's spirit was guilt.
Because he believes he's responsible for her death.
And Palpatine himself, Palpatine's had like 13 years here to groom Anakin and make Anakin see him as a father figure. By the time of the original trilogy, when Anakin has had more time seeing him in who he really is, yeah, now he wants to kill him. But in this moment, where he still sees Palpatine as an ally, it makes no sense to try and kill him. And Palpatine's exact words to him. Now, he implied that he could teach him how to do it in the other scenes, like in the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise,
which is the best scene in the film,
right? But when Anakin pledges himself to Palpatine's teachings and says, "Just help me save Padme," Palpatine's almost his exact words are, "To cheat death is a power is a secret only known by one individual. But if we work together, I'm sure we can unlock the secrets." That's really a big chunk of why Anakin turns on the Jedi in the first place. So Palpatine has manipulated him into thinking the Jedi are power hungry and looking to overthrow the government. So now Anakin is like in protection mode. If I do this, I stop the Jedi. Palpatine's talked me into believing that every single other Jedi in the galaxy was involved in this. So he's no longer feels as guilty about it.
Makes sense.
And Palpatine also kind of implies, he tells him, like, after Anakin is done in the temple and Palpatine tells him to go to Mustafar, he tells him, "Only then will you be strong enough to save Padme." Kind of implying that, like, your power in the dark side of the Force is directly correlated how much blood is on your hands.
And that's how you make a red lightsaber in certain canons as well.
Yeah, I mean, in the Legends canon, it's a process of Sith alchemy where you create your own synthetic crystal, since the Force creates crystals naturally, and why would they ever make one for a Darksider? Whereas in canon, the explanation is that you steal a Jedi's lightsaber, take the crystal, and then fill it with the dark side of the Force. Just fill it with your own pure hatred, and that makes it bleed. Actually, I have...
That's metal. That is metal.
I have the Star Wars Force Awakens visual dictionary. I can tell you for a fact, the reason Kylo Ren's lightsaber has that crackle design is because he was still conflicted when he was... and he did it wrong when he tried to bleed his hatred into the lightsaber, so the crystal itself cracked.
That's kind of cool, actually.
I wish that were explored in the movie, but here we are.
Yeah, it has to be side material because we can't put that in the main film for some reason.
That's part of why I think the prequel trilogy is just objectively better than the sequel trilogy. I think it was Shea Frillis who said, "The prequels are a really great idea executed terribly. The sequel trilogy are a terrible idea executed really well."
I can see that.
Yeah, I don't entirely agree. But I feel like the difference between the two really is the fact that when you take away the subversion argument of, like, you didn't like it because you wanted to see something different, the prequels still stand alone as good movies.
Yeah.
And the sequels, just because they had no vision, no direction, they don't really have a leg to stand on.
And that is definitely a fair point. So that moves us to the top 3, and I guess that means we're talking exclusively original trilogy.
So honestly, we have the same general sense of how everything goes. Like, we both put the Solo and the sequels at the bottom, we both put the prequels and Rogue One in the middle, and we put the original trilogy at the top. So this whole thing has just been a discussion of, like, We agree on where they are. We just don't agree on where exactly they are.
Yep. And I think that's going to continue because my number 3 is Return of the Jedi.
Mine is A New Hope.
Okay. All right, you go first.
I think A New Hope, what it does something better than any other Star Wars film, is atmosphere. Everything feels very lived in, and it almost feels like there's Okay, I'm gonna sound corny. It almost feels like there's meaning in every frame, and that sounds very, very annoying.
Oh no, I absolutely agree.
I don't know. The atmosphere, it just gives off a whole different vibe. The tone, the way the characters act, the way the sets are created, it feels very different. And I really like it for that.
Yeah, the world feels lived in, as we talked about in our original thoughts of the trilogy.
Uh-huh. That's one of the things I feel like Solo was missing out on.
Absolutely.
Solo tried to make everything feel lived in by just making everything feel gritty and dark. It's the same thing that Ron Howard did with the Grinch movie, where he just made it look unpleasant to look at. And A New Hope is able to make things look dingy and lived in, but it's still nice to see. It visually is still stunning and likable.
Yes, it's an inhospitable desert, but it looks beautiful.
And that's something that continues into Empire Strikes Back as well. It's a gross, disgusting swamp, but it's a pretty swamp.
Yeah, visually at least. Yeah, different colors, vibrant colors actually. And that's so yeah, it's a good thing.
Yeah, there's not a ton you can really say. I mean, the fight scene between Obi-Wan and Vader is not very good.
And that's just because it was the first one, and they're both old men. So
yeah, I wish somebody did that CG thing of like scene 38.
Oh yeah, no, I absolutely loved that.
I think it's a little over the top, but it gets the point across.
It gets the point across that they're actually able to fight.
And I will say, as much as we criticize the sequel trilogy, the choreography, apart from the throne room scene, is really, really good. Like the fight scenes with Kylo and Luke, it almost feels like it's a war. In The Last Jedi, it almost feels like a battle between the prequel choreography and the original choreography.
Yeah. I mean, I will admit, like, especially, I know you talked about the throne room scene in Return of the Jedi, where they clearly are missing marks and with very accommodating stuff.
Last Jedi was really bad.
Last Jedi was terrible in terms of that. I'm like, wow, really accommodating stuntmen, people clearly missing their marks.
And guys like just standing there with their sword drawn in the background.
I'm gonna get you. I'm gonna get you.
And then like 5 seconds later, then they charge in.
Oh yeah,
they're waiting their turn.
Very certain CW show in terms of the henchmen. All right, so we move on to number 2?
I guess so.
Okay. Mine is A New Hope, actually.
Mine is Return of the Jedi.
Oh, right, I never actually talked about Return of the Jedi. Oh, we can do it now.
Yeah, okay. So, Return of the Jedi, I think this would have been well, I guess it is still my second favorite. So, I think Return of the Jedi, the highs of Return of the Jedi are almost higher than any other Star Wars film.
And I get that. Yeah, that's why I have it so high up.
So for Return of the Jedi, I feel like part of what Return of the Jedi, I have a bit of a bias. It was my favorite Star Wars film as a kid. We didn't own it on video or DVD, but it was at a local video store. And my sister and I, the one time, we rented it for 3 days, and we watched it every single night that we had it. Just because we both loved it that much. Granted, I think my sister just had a crush on Mark Hamill, but she was with me every step of the way.
All right, I see it.
But, like, I don't know. I feel like a lot of the criticisms people have against it, I feel like they just don't hold very much weight. People criticize Return of the Jedi for... They say the Jabba scene makes no sense and it takes way too long. I think it makes total sense. I talked about that in my Ben Shapiro thing. But also, I feel like it needed to be long to give any kind of weight to the end of Empire. Because if they just walked in, got Han, and got out...
Yeah, that wouldn't have been satisfying.
Yeah, so the fact that they had to work this hard to undo what Vader did and when he sent him off with Boba Fett, it just makes Empire a more impressive a cliffhanger, in my opinion. And also, having the Jabba scene, it works because they need to have a threat to overcome that isn't the Empire, because we need to get reintroduced to the characters after the dreary, miserable ending of Empire Strikes Back, where everybody's lost and miserable. So this allows us to rekindle and see their spirit and see why we like them again. So we're getting used to all the characters again, seeing what they've been up to the last year, seeing the plans, and we also finally get the head-to-head threat that is... It almost feels like Jabba has been built up in the first two films.
And he kind of was, because Han always at least had a side thing of, like, I have my debt to Jabba still.
Now, one of my big problems with A New Hope is the special edition scene, because I feel like it's stupid and pointless.
Yeah,
and
because we already had the Greedo scene.
And the CG Jabba looks really stupid, especially compared to the original puppet.
Because wasn't it originally just a guy?
Yes.
It was originally just a guy.
So they had to CG him over. And
actually, you know this because I actually gave you that for Christmas one year. The original Marvel Comics adaptation from the 70s of New Hope had Jabba in it, and he looks like Joe Camel.
You're right. I thought he looked like the guy who cried over the Rancor in Episode 6, honestly.
He kind of did. I was like...
They had similar wardrobes.
Yeah, but it's like Joe Camel with a mustache is kind of what it reminded me of. But, Return to the Jedi, I will say that, Vader sacrificing himself for the greater good and fulfilling the destiny is nice. There's a lot of lines from Return to the Jedi that I quote all the time, that I can quote. Of course, your overconfidence is your weakness.
And your faith in your friends is yours. I believe you will find the defense shield fully operational.
Of course, all of them are from Palpatine. So, he's just a very charismatic bad guy. That's why I enjoy... Again, the reason I put it lower than A New Hope is just because part of it is the Ewok scene, and, I just think that there's too many lows in the movie. I think A New Hope is just solid from beginning to end, and that's the reason I rank it at 2 as opposed to 3, which I have Return of the Jedi. And they even made that joke in the Family Guy parody, where they raid the base, and then Peter's, making them dig their own graves with their helmets. He's like, Han, that's pretty dark. I have had it up to here with the cutesy crap and the Ewoks.
So, let me say in my defense, that's actually one of the things I was going to address. The Ewoks... I know Rob Walker, many years ago, he made a video on his own podcast talking about, how he would rewrite Return of the Jedi. One of the things he suggested was that Ewoks were planning on going to war with the Empire, and we knew this going in. They're allies to the rebellion. The problem with that is it undercuts the all hope is lost. Now, Return of the Jedi was trying to... I think it did go a little hard in trying to make some cutesy stuff. But the idea of the Ewoks in general is a really good one. The idea of this indigenous group that the Empire brushed aside and didn't even consider taking into account because they're just so much drunk on their own power, thinking of these indigenous people as just nobodies, nothings, less than human. So if we knew that the Ewoks were a serious threat before they went to war with the Empire, it would undercut the all hope is lost moment where Palpatine is holding all the cards and tempting Luke with the dark side. Because at that point, we reveal it was all a trap. Palpatine not only knew they were coming, but planned for them to come and took it into account, and his plan was for them to show up here so that he could send, and he had the Legion awaiting them. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of all the things he didn't take into account that boil
again,
into
your
his
overconfidence is your weakness.
And also, his plan with Luke doesn't... All of his plans don't work because the odds... He was playing with a lot of variables, and it didn't fall in his favor this time because they were... You said overconfidence, but also the fact that he is just not... There are a lot of factors he's not taking into account because of his overconfidence. The dark side, for all intents and purposes, is like a drug that's encouraging you and bringing out the worst of you. And everyone else, up until Luke, had that one taste of the dark side and ran with it. And this is going into a little bit of expanded lore. That happened with Darth Sidious himself. When he was a teenager, he met Darth Plagueis. Darth Plagueis made a few interesting comments that pushed him in the right direction. And then Palpatine, after a few conversations, goes off and...
Well, okay, so my question... This is just another tangent, I'm sorry. Plagueis is human?
Plagueis is a moon. It's a different species. They run the banking clans of the galaxy.
Because I know one of them was, the little aliens who play the Cantina Band song in New Hope, and I don't remember which Darth it was.
That was That I know what you're talking about. The Bith species.
Yeah.
They're the ones who are playing the. So
Yeah, I know one of
Plagueis' master was one of them.
Oh, okay. So that was the lineage.
There's
Oh,
a
wait.
video I need to. I think I need to send it to you at some point. The politics of the Phantom Menace explained.
Oh yeah,
where
that's
it breaks down all the backstory.
when I explained that to my friend, and she didn't know anything about that. She did know about Catholicism and changing your name, and that's how I explained the Darths.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like, they had a name before. Now, when they became Siths, they're Darth whatever. Usually, it's a variation on an evil word, but
I'm sorry. The image of the Darth title being the equivalent of Sister Mary Clarence is not an image I knew I needed.
Basically is.
You're right. You're right.
That's how I explained it to her, at least. Sorry, continue.
So there was a video, the politics of the Phantom Menace explained, and a lot of it draws from the Darth Plagueis book. And since I read the Darth Plagueis book, I was watching this animatic go through, and I was like, yes, I remember this, I love this. And I need to send it to you because it explains a lot of the context. But anyway, Darth Sidious himself had that one bad day, almost like what the Joker talks about.
One bad day.
Yup, that, where he did something unspeakable and horrible when he had the dark side egging him on, and he had his moment where he's like, well, I just did something that's unforgivable, and there's no turning back from that, so I'm going to press forward and get worse and buckle down. And that's a pattern with a lot of villains in media. It was the same thing with Walter White becoming Heisenberg. It was Light Yagami becoming Kira, and it was with Anakin. It was a slew of unforgivable things, but it was the thing that finally broke the camel's back. But Luke has that moment. And Dooku had that moment where he did something terrible, and he had that rush of the dark side, and they realized they liked it, so they kept going and wanted more of it. That's why I compare it to a drug, because dark side is addicting.
yes, but Luke realized his mistake, saw the exact same thing when he cut off Vader's hand. There's that scene where he looks at his own robotic hand and realizes, I'm becoming my father, and willingly chooses to stop.
And Luke had something that Palpatine could never take into account. Dooku had emotional baggage. Anakin had emotional baggage. Luke had emotional baggage, but he had the one thing that none of them had, a stable home life, which almost makes Owen and Beru the secret heroes of the trilogy. But because they raised Luke and they taught him how, like, a normal, healthy way of dealing with your emotions, he was able to let go in that moment and be like, okay, I turned to the dark side in this moment, and it passed, and I felt the anger, but I can deal with this now, and this doesn't define who I am.
And it's the flaw of the Jedi teachings.
Mm-hmm.
They needed to teach the younglings how to healthily deal with emotions, and
I think for the most part they did, because there's, like, we have the extreme cases, like Vader, Xanatos, all of Shaak Ti's apprentices, but for the most part, most
there's
Jedi...
a Jedi called Xanatos?
Yeah.
Like the Gargoyles villain?
Well, it's spelled with an X, but yeah.
So's Xanatos in the
Oh,
Gargoyles villain.
I thought his was spelled
Oh
with
no,
a
it's spelled
Z.
with an X.
Okay, well, either way. He was Qui-Gon's first apprentice.
Now I can only picture Richard Xanatos in Jedi robes. He already has the ponytail.
Alright, but anyway, so, apart from those extreme cases of people who didn't gel, a lot of Jedi just turned into, like, calm, reasonable people. Yeah, you have Vader, but you also have your Plo Koons, your Ki-Adi-Mundis, your Shaak Tis.
Mm-hmm.
And, the real problem with Anakin was Anakin had that emotional baggage coming in, and they made an exception letting him into the Jedi Order, and they didn't continue making exceptions to help him achieve that emotional balance that most Jedi take for granted. Because he had awful things. He was born into human trafficking. And he also had Palpatine in his ear for his whole life. Since the Jedi didn't understand how to reach him, Palpatine did, and Palpatine was there to be there, like the angel on the shoulder almost. That's how he's presenting himself. He's just like,
When in
yes,
reality,
it's okay.
he was the devil.
Exactly. But anyway, that's my point. Like, I guess I don't have the same problem with the grander Jedi Order that most people do, but I also feel like the flaw with Anakin, Sidious and Vader both assumed that Luke had that same baggage from Anakin since he never knew his parents and he's an emotional hothead like the rest of the Skywalker family. But they never realized The thing they never realized, Leia takes more after Anakin, Luke takes more after Padme. And that's one of the brilliant parts of the prequel trilogy. Like, I watch these two on screen, even if their dialogue together isn't very good, I watch Anakin and Padme, and I see the traits that were passed down into Luke and Leia.
Yeah.
And when you're writing a prequel, that's really, really hard.
Yeah, that is very difficult. And I guess we might as well move on to number one, and clearly we have the same number one.
Yup. Say it with me.
The
One,
Star
two-
Wars Christmas Special.
I was about to make that same joke, and then you said it before I counted to 3, and
Damn it.
ruined it.
I'm sorry.
Dang it.
Dang it.
Okay, but yes, Empire Strikes Back.
Yes, Empire Strikes Back is obviously our top thing. It just does everything that a movie sequel needs to do. It raises the stakes, adds to the lore, it furthers the characters, and it actually ends on a downer. And it's surprisingly a downer, but like enough of like we can go from here, you know?
I feel like, to an extent, I have a couple problems, but Empire Strikes Back, for all intents and purposes, is perfect. There are things I wish they had focused a little bit on more, but everything that needed to be focused on was focused on. And I'll say this, before I forget, I had a problem with Return of the Jedi. My big problem with Return of the Jedi is Harrison Ford. Harrison Ford was really adamant that he was supposed to die in Empire Strikes Back. And he was being a baby in the background during the development of Return of the Jedi. And he was like, I don't know if I want to be in that movie or not. I gotta say it in an angry Han voice. I don't know if I want to be in that movie or not. That failed completely at a Harrison Ford impression, but you get what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
So they had to write him in last minute. This is something Sam Witwer talked about, like, in an interview.
That does explain why it took him a while to get on Frozen.
And they didn't even know if he was going to be in the movie or not. And he almost plays Han in this movie like a caricature, and it's annoying to me. It's distracting to me. Like, he and Leia don't have much to do in this movie because a lot of it is focused on Luke and Vader. But that's part of the reason why I have Empire over Return of the Jedi. It gives them all agency and gives them something to do, and that's the big advantage Empire has over Return of the Jedi and A New Hope.
That all of the characters work in tandem with one another.
And that's one of the big problems of the sequel trilogy. It just doesn't give the characters enough time in the same room to really... Like, when that big hug happens at the end of Rise of Skywalker between Rey, Finn, and Poe, I'm like, they have known each other. Like, this entire trilogy took place across, like, 3 days, and they were all in the same room, a collective total of 2 hours.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, you barely have interacted as a trio.
So yeah, Empire Strikes Back, they're all apart from each other, but because the actors had such strong chemistry, and you saw how much they meant to each other at the end of the last film and the beginning of this film when they're all on Hoth, it makes sense. You can see how much time they spent together off screen. I think also part of what elevates it is the fact that this is the film where George was in the background. He was allowed to just do what he does best because he wasn't working with the actors in one-on-one. He's great at visuals, he's great at storytelling, but they had, what's his name, Irvin Kershner?
Yeah.
So he specifically called Irvin Kershner because he was like, all right, I want to make this film. I feel like this film is doing things that are not in my strengths as a director, so I want you to come in. And part of the reason the prequels failed is because he couldn't find anyone to come in and do that.
Yeah, where he could be like the overall story arc guy, and somebody else could direct the actors.
Exactly. And Irvin Kershner told him flat out, like, I will do this on the condition that I don't have you needling in my ear telling me how to do my job. So Irvin Kershner was allowed to do a bunch of cool stuff, and since he was, like, the visuals and the aesthetic and everything else that George does really well, George was allowed to shine on, and Irvin was there to do, like, the things that George wouldn't have known just being out of film school. Like that scene where Han and Leia are arguing in the tunnel, and then people are just walking around them and not paying attention. That's a great example of show don't tell. We learn from that Han and Leia argue constantly enough that people are desensitized to it, and that just adds so much depth to their relationship throughout the rest of the movie.
They're like, just ignore him. Yeah, it's basically the better version of the scene I like from Episode 7 with the stormtroopers like, I do not want to deal with this right now.
Yep, pretty much.
But it's much more subtle. Like, you have to think about it. It's just, and yes, no, I think the stakes are sufficiently raised. Even when they introduce new characters like Yoda. Actually, technically, the Emperor. Yeah, because the Emperor first shows up in this.
This is one of the things that the special editions fixed, because I thought the original Holocron looked too much. The guy who voiced him in Empire Strikes Back originally sounded too much like Alec Guinness. Which, if they were trying to build up the possibility that Obi-Wan may be the bad guy, is fine, but it just doesn't work for the overall trilogy.
Yeah, when they switched it out for Ian McDiarmid, that was a good choice. It's really, the Family Guy version is actually really funny because Carter is, Lois's dad is the Emperor, and in that scene, instead of immediately going to business, he's getting rid of his CD collection.
I remember that scene.
He's like, what do you want? Jagged Little Pill? No, this was the soundtrack to my '95. And then he's, you sure you don't want it? Oh, okay. I've talked myself into keeping it. Like, just the idea of him going to Darth Vader and just casually pawning his CDs off of it. Like, that is funny.
Also, because I feel like this is the film that cemented Vader as a bad guy. In the first film, Tarkin is the major threat. He's on Tarkin's leash. In the last film, he's conflicted about whether or not he wants to be evil anymore, so he's not really the major antagonist. This film, he's unhinged, he has nobody telling him what to do. Vader is allowed to just shine as a villain. And I watched the behind-the-scenes stuff about the final fight with Luke on Bespin. It's cool. They used a lot of techniques used in horror movies to make Vader feel that much more like a looming threat. And it shines. It's one of the things I actually really like about Kenobi. I mentioned earlier that scene where he's walking towards Obi-Wan and killing random people. It had like the ambiance of a villain in a slasher movie, and the beating tension.
And of course, the thing that is absorbed by pop culture, the thing that every single person who hasn't even seen Star Wars knows: Luke, I am your father.
It's no, I am your father.
Yes, I know.
He never said Luke.
Pop culture osmosis made it Luke, I am your father. That's why I wanted to mention that. That's why I am your father. No, that's impossible!
Search your feelings. You know it to be true. Fun fact about A New Hope. The guy who was the body double for Vader in the movie had no idea they were going to dub him over. The scenes where he was actually filming it, he was speaking with like a thick German accent because he thought they were doing the Nazi thing, and he was under the impression that that's what Vader sounds like. He didn't know they had James Earl Jones until he saw the film. I think, anyway. I could be wrong.
Oh, they didn't realize he dubbed him over. Yeah, I did hear that story, but yeah, that's actually the technique I kind of want them to do for Doctor Doom in the MCU. Like, don't make it a notable person in the suit. Make it a notable person voicing the character, so that way you can get more mileage out of him. And Doom, I don't think Doom should be in the... Yeah, let's date this podcast, shall we? I don't want him to be in the upcoming Fantastic Four movie with Pedro Pascal as Mr. Fantastic. I think Doom deserves his own film.
That's going to be a hard sell given the tone and genre that MCU has so firmly set itself in. But you're right.
Like, Doom is the one villain they can get away with making a solo villain movie. Because he's Doom. Well, now that we're at the end, I guess I just want to say, even though this series has had its rocky moments, it's had its rough patches, it's had its fair of stumbles, especially recently, it's still a series I come back to. It's still a series that I hold dear to my heart.
It's funny, actually. We had way more to say about what we didn't like than what we do like, and I don't know what that says about us.
Yeah, I guess...
It's hard to talk about... it's just hard to talk about positivity. It's just, oh yeah, I like this part. I like this part. Oh yeah, I like this part too. Cool.
Yeah, it's weird. Like, the conversation seems to come from, like, not necessarily negativity, because we share similar enough views, but it's just what we would do better, I guess, is, like, what we wish could have been. And
True.
That's just, like, it says more about the human condition, really, than anything else.
Maybe they had a point in The Last Jedi. Maybe we shouldn't fight to destroy what we hate. but to save what we love. Well, thank you for watching, everybody. Thanks for sticking with us in this 2-year gap. Maybe we'll make another one soon. Maybe we won't. I don't know. Our work schedules are our work schedules.
I mean, we might have a certain RPG in the pipeline. You know, a certain Japanese RPG.
Oh yeah, I forgot to mention that. We recorded on the day we went to see Doctor Strange, and then that podcast has just been sitting in my PC because I haven't had the time to actually edit the video footage. So that's probably going to be after this one.
Yep. I was about to say, it's in the pipeline, so theoretically we could get that released at some point. May the force be with you.
Yeah, that's a good note to end on. Bye, everybody!
Bye.
Bye.